Good morning. This is a nice, intimate gathering, and the good old joke, quality, not quantity. So, welcome. I hope that you had an enjoyable night last night. How many people were at the dinner last night? Oh, great. Yeah, fantastic. It was good fun, wasn't it? So this morning we're in for a treat: how to build a world-class company and international leaders through understanding and managing diversity. I think that's a good idea. Be one of us. So I will give you just the brief bio on the program. As consultant to FTSE 100 companies and previously manager of Global Diversity Network, which is a knowledge-sharing forum of global heads of diversity, including a very impressive who's who like Barclays, BP, Cable and Wireless, Dow Chemicals, HP, etc., etc. Tess will examine the crucial role of HR processes, for example, performance management, defining competencies, recruitment, training and development, employee engagement and so on, in promoting a safe, inclusive and productive work environment, which sounds like the best sort to have. So I'm sure you've heard Tess in previous sessions, so I'm sure we're going to enjoy this very much.
Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see you all here. In the keynote presentation that I did on Wednesday, I mentioned that human resources has a pivotal role to play in converting all the rhetoric that we've heard into reality, be it performance management, training and development, policies, scrutinising them, etc. So I see this morning as an opportunity to drill down and look at some of the case studies that I gave you a glimpse of on Wednesday in more detail, to get underneath some of the issues that we highlighted. Good morning, welcome. Also, I'm very mindful of the fact that the last couple of days you've been talked at quite a lot by experts about different things. But I firmly believe that, I'm not an expert, but if I am, then we all are. And I believe that all of you in this room have got a whole gamut of experience, and I really, really like to draw on that in this next hour. And I see this morning as sort of not so much throwing lots more input at you. There would be some, obviously, but I'm going to use this as an opportunity for a more interactive session, if you like, an opportunity after the past 2 days, full-on days, to pause, reflect, process some of the stuff that's come out of that. Were you all here for Wednesday? You're all aware of the definition of what diversity is, basically, inclusion. That's great. Okay. So actually, before we move straight in, good morning. There's really not that many of us, so can we just briefly just say your name so we know who's in the room, what organisation you're from, and that's it. Just 2 pieces of information. That'd be really nice. Who'd like to kick off? Good morning. Oh, thank you for that. Thank you. Great. Thanks very much. But very significant, I sense. Yes, thank you. Oh, absolutely, and to us. Thank you. Simon?
Simon Robinson from Health and Care Australia.
Thanks, Simon.
I'm Janet Lee from British Chemical.
Thanks, Janet.
I'm Julie Pollard from the Red Bush Foundation.
Thank you.
Joanne Costello from Equilibrium Bar in Brisbane.
Welcome.
Lucy Brown from Northcote.
Thanks, Lucy.
James Lewis, I'm just helping on the summit and supporting.
Just helping and supporting. You've been the backbone of everything that's been going on here. You've been fabulous, James. Thank you for joining us. Kicking off with some of the... I'm not sure I showed this image, actually, on Wednesday. Yeah, that's right. So this is, I think I did show this image on Wednesday. I'm sure you remember it. Initial. What I didn't. Sorry.
It's pretty memorable.
It's pretty memorable, isn't it? Yeah, it is. What I didn't have an opportunity to do on Wednesday was ask you what your reactions were seeing that. So just immediate reactions when you saw that and see it now. What kind of things hit you? Astonishment.
Sex sells to men.
Sex sells to men. Yeah.
Laughable first and then disgusted.
Laughable then disgusted. Yeah.
Similar, actually, sort of stereotypical but shocking.
Yes.
It's like a joke. You've got to look at it. This is what not to do.
And actually, no one would actually do that. Yeah, I can't believe anyone did it. Yeah.
What company was it? Sexy and Dirty?
The Sexy and Dirty, they've proudly put their brand on the bottom, so I can tell you it was Bowie Castlebank Limited. That appeared in Personnel Today.
Very traditional newspaper.
An industry, yeah, absolutely. That's an industry newspaper, which I think was particularly shocking. If you see it in other distributions like The Economist or the FT, it's almost, to be expected, equally shocking, but to be expected. But to find it in an industry outlet was particularly, and it speaks to me volumes about really where we are on the subject. And this is a HR industry, and there were no complaints, other than me, obviously. So it's like. And that was the point that I alluded to on Wednesday. If you see one thing, even as in your face as these, on its own, we don't notice them. We just flick through the pages and we don't notice them, but they go in subliminally. The messages go in subliminally. Just to let you, so that you're aware, the weapons of mass distraction will go into more detail in the marketing stream, because that was a marketing blunder, if you like, but it had ramifications for the HR department because it was approved apparently by the HR department, and this was an EasyJet advertisement that was sent out, and it was used in The Economist to mock sex, the whole sex sales mentality. So they were really hauled over the coals as a company, and the ASA forced them to remove it. What about these two? What kind of reactions do you have looking at those? Just so as you can read that this one was for Lloyd's TSB, and these are all recent, they're not sort of old, and the job is for trying to get people into the bank. Picture of a young rugby guy. It's not having your eyebrows shaved off by the lads at the Union Bar. Blokey, yeah.
There's nothing to appeal there for a young woman.
Nothing to appeal there for a young woman.
There's no way that a young woman would relate to that.
No.
In fact, it would probably put a young woman off.
Absolutely.
It would have the opposite, directly the opposite.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
There are guys on as well. They're not particularly sporty or macho sort of guy.
Really good point. Absolutely. If you're not one of those sporty, blokey, rugby guys, why would you? Absolutely. It gives a very clear. It's very, very specific, isn't it? It's almost writing out a job description of the kind of person they want. And these advertisements do have an impact. And then organisations like Lloyd's TSB, who do have a very good track record in diversity, who have a very strong diversity department, and an ad like that completely undermines it. And when I speak to the people in the diversity departments, they're absolutely mortified because they don't know. They don't know that this has appeared. They haven't seen it. It's released by their marketing department or by a HR department, approved by a HR department, but the diversity people didn't know about it. So the alignment is absolutely crucial, that we get this into the backbone of the organisation. What about these? It's all about white men. This one reads here: thought leader, problem solver, difference maker. And that particular one, all the others were job advertisements. This one was for MBA. What representation do you have of women on MBA courses here in Australia? Yeah. Well, in the AFR yesterday, it's higher than in the UK, but in the AFR last night I came across a piece that said it's 30%. Yeah, and in some institutions, probably these ones, very little, 10%. Okay, I think that was just a bit of a taster, and I already made the point on Wednesday that all those images that I showed serve cumulatively to create a certain kind of environment, and the HR department in releasing advertisements like that plays a pivotal role in sourcing talent for the organisation, not just with the images but with the language, the words, what's in the subtext underneath that, what kind of person are they looking for, what kind of language do they use, is it very masculine, macho language, or is it more inclusive language, does it stipulate that you have to have 7 years unbroken experience, for example, in a particular role, which may exclude certain people who've taken women to take care of children, or men who want to do other things and have taken a career break. So what do we do? What does the HR department do that undermines this whole area? This is something I just want you to think about, and then we'll come back and have some more input, certainly from my perspective, some principles again for success. But for now, what I'd really like you to think about, just briefly, how you would leverage, how the HR department could leverage diversity and inclusion in order to really make your company effective, specifically with regard to the following areas, because this is the bread and butter of the HR department. Performance management processes. How could this be utilised to leverage to improve that within your organisation? Policies and procedures. What kind of things do you need to talk about when you switch your diversity and inclusion radar on? What kind of things do you then need to go and look for that you mightn't have otherwise seen in your policies and procedures? What about your recruitment? That's probably been made easy for you because we've just shown some of case examples of that. But again, try and draw out of those some principles. Okay, this is, if I'm going back to my HR department, I'd say, okay, this is generally what we should do, and this is generally what we really shouldn't do, because we don't want to be in Tess Finch-Lees' next presentation. Training and development. What kind of things do you need to think about there in HR department? Who gets access? Over where does your training and development take place? Off-site, overnight, that kind of place. Think about those things just briefly. I'm going to get you. There's enough of us now to have 2 subgroups, which is fabulous. So I'm just going to get you 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've got 6. So can we just go, Julie, do you mind joining this side of the room here? So we've got 6 here, and then we've got 6 here, and then briefly just discuss, maybe take a couple of notes. Somebody take, designated person take notes just for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and debrief. Okay, sorry. I know I set you a very unfair task, gave you far too much to do in far too little time. So apologies for that. Being an Irish Catholic, I won't sleep tonight for guilt. Okay, but I did hear some very interesting discussions, and in the true spirit of diversity, you deviated from the script anyway. So who'd like to just share some of the nuggets that you were coming up with? Some great stories. Of course, stories from your own experiences, which were great. So who'd like to share one?
On the performance management, just starting, we discussed that the employees need to be very much involved, so it's all about consultation, asking the employees how they can improve and what sort of measures need to be put in place for them rather than imposing anything on them.
Yeah.
And recognise that different people achieve outcomes in different ways, so there's no one size fits all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good point. Absolutely. Okay. Over here?
We went for an easier one actually. We went for recruitment because we were.
Okay.
Well, if I give one and then you can add 2. We came up with about 3 or 4 things, and I guess the first one was around the fact that the employer brand needs to be really tightly aligned to the company brand when you choose images and style of headlines and advertisements.
Absolutely.
Even if you're using an external organisation like a recruitment consultant to go in and advertise for you under their name, still the impact and impression relates directly back to you.
Absolutely. Yes.
So we talked a little around, sort of filter systems that would need to be in place internally to check before an advert goes to press, and your organisation through different.
Oh, really? That's excellent practice.
I come from a very small, the organisations I work with, the biggest one might have 200 staff.
Right.
And I think that, on a number of positions, the director will actually sign, like the director of the museum will actually sign up on the ad because we have a graphic designer as a member of staff.
Right. That's just great practice, really. It's a real health check safety. It's a real sort of Six Sigma approach to HR, isn't it, really? Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you. Anything else from over here?
Yeah, just the process itself and the wording within the advertisements, the process in terms of the interview and the evaluation.
Yeah, what about the processes in the interview and evaluation? What do you need to think about? Filtering them, exactly.
As well.
Uh-huh.
The other interesting thing I've talked about, I see a lot of ads that actually go the other way, that look like they're trying to offer diversity. They actually get so specific that people are discouraged from applying. Maybe they don't have an interest in the sport. It might be a sporting association that's advertising something. Somebody who's terribly interested in cycling would be highly regarded. They actually put up everybody else who's got no interest in cycling, but they might actually be ideal for the position.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's about wording those sorts of things very carefully. And disability organisations or Indigenous organisations can suffer the same. Doesn't mean you're not looking for someone with a genuine understanding and
right.
Being able to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But it's how it's worded and how it's portrayed.
Yeah. So being neutral to make sure that you're not excluding anyone from any talent pool. Okay. Anything else?
I just think that is a really good practice for people who do the screening, so having got the applications, but then all the personal details to be removed, so you don't actually know the person's name or their address or anything like that, because if that's not relevant to choosing whether they do the job. So immediately you see the name is the neighbours Chinese and things from Asia.
Exactly. You don't. Absolutely. It conjures up your own unconscious stereotypes and prejudice. Absolutely. That's a practice that we have in the UK. Is it a practice here? Sometimes. David, you wanted to make a point?
I just wanted to make a point that really so many times within organisations, departments are given, there's a lot of territorialism, HR territorialism.
Yep.
So this is HR's job. And that's it, and that culture pervades to the extent that actually HR would be paranoid and saying, look, we're not giving, there's other members of staff some of our, power.
Yeah.
That's the word I'm using. And what that reflects is an organisation that's very segmented, that isn't thinking as an organisation, that's just thinking as a little group of departments.
Absolutely.
Because in order for HR to have leverage, it's actually an issue beyond HR. HR should be driving that, should be steering where those conversations are going. But actually, it does involve other departments, other people.
Yes.
What I'm saying is the HR practice, the administration of HR needs to be diverse in its thinking.
Absolutely.
As well as in its application.
Yes, yeah. I think you're right. There is a sense of territory, and as a profession, sometimes feeling validated in an organisation, and you do that by holding on to this is your turf, this is your territory. And actually, for this to work effectively, you've got to let go. You've got to let go of that and work with and educate different departments. But also, you mentioned putting the safeguards in place. That's important too. Any other points from that?
Just around the recruitment piece, and it's kind of come out indirectly, but from from my point of view, I also say it's really important to get the right people doing the interviewing who are representative of where you want to be, so that they're not all white middle-aged men doing the interviews.
Crucial, yeah.
Because particularly in the graduate population, our experience is that graduates will look to see who they meet,
They will.
the embodiment of that company, both through what we know from the look round process, the big sort of main graduate recruitment. It's so key to get the right people out there,
Yeah.
representative of
Yes.
how you want to be.
Yeah.
portrayed.
You're absolutely right. That's a really, really good point that we're going to look at in a minute when we look at best practice principles. And these are just some principles that I've sort of garnered going through this process with HR departments. And some of this, will be sort of fairly obvious. But for a HR department trying to do this, to leverage it in an organisation, really have to get your allies and sponsors at the top of the organisation first. You really do have to start at the top of the organisation and not shy away from that. The kind of examples we have in diversity and inclusion, where it works, bless you, where it works, people have done that very successfully. BP, John Brown, whenever he makes a public appearance anywhere, he'll mention diversity. Now, and the fact is, in reality, he actually puts a lot behind that. They have done a great deal of work with regard to cultural diversity, for example. I think they've got a lot of work to do, and they'll acknowledge this themselves at senior level with regard to diversity. But they've certainly done, even at senior level, a great deal of work with their international people from different locations and cultures, and taken really good care of them. But that's an example. He will use every podium he can to do that, and that supports the whole thing. It's taken very seriously as a business issue when that happens. The role, if you're a HR role, you've got a day job. It's really important that whoever is responsible for this is reporting into the CEO at the highest level, that it's taken seriously. Tackling diversity at institutional level, touched on this on Wednesday, in that I pulled out some ways that this whole thing can be quite pervasive and systemic. The kind of things that I touched on briefly on Wednesday was the kind of things that you'd look at to see, if you wanted to take a temperature check, how well you're doing, how healthy is your organisation. First thing you might want to look at is what kind of hours people are working, the long hours culture thing. And I think this is actually quite fundamental, particularly with regard to gender diversity, because that long hours culture prolongs the cycle of disadvantage for women, but also men, as you made the point, James, who don't subscribe to this whole masculine way of doing business. And certainly in the research that I've done recently, I've spoken with many men who, in confidence, would tell me they were actively looking for other jobs because of the fact they signed up to an organisation where they thought they'd have work-life balance and would, as fathers, be able to spend time with their young families. Then when they get in there, realise the 40% travel has become 70% travel, and they're leaving. They're actively looking for other jobs. And when I ask them, are you going to disclose that information to the HR department when you do your exit interview? Usually it's A, what exit interview? And B, even if they asked, I wouldn't tell them. Because it's still socially unacceptable for men to want to have a life outside of work. And yet we know men want lives outside of work. We know that. We know that. All the research says it. But we don't want to hear it in organisations because we want to push people as far as we can. And men are the easiest people to push because women go and have babies. But as long as we do that, men are under increasing pressure. But also women, because they're paid less than men, in dual career families, are the ones taking time out to have children. That then impacts on their career. They come back in at a lower rung of the ladder, so getting to that top position, even if you wanted to, is even more difficult. And we know that when women take time out to have children also, there's a pension deficit. So there's a shortfall in their elder years. So they're dependent on men and society in their later years. And that's a cycle of disadvantage that I think is quite scandalous in our society, across the world globally. So there's a key role in HR to spot that and the implications of it, the ramifications of those long hours culture on the people that you're working with. The other kind of things in terms of institutional symptoms that you can pick up on once you've switched your radar on, again, little things you might not notice once you switch your radar on. It's a bit like once you switch your radar on for environmental issues, you notice when someone pushes the big button on the toilet and they flushed it longer than it needed to be. You notice whether something's recycled or not. It's the same with diversity and inclusion. Language. Is there a very macho banter in an organisation? I worked with a senior HR team just recently in the energy sector, and there was only one woman on the team. That's quite interesting in itself, because women represent 80% of the HR profession, generally speaking. It's a very female profession, but when you get to the senior positions, it drops to 20%. Now, that's interesting in itself. But at in this environment, the population were denying that there were any issues of gender or sex discrimination in the organisation. And at one point, one of the guys got very animated and said, somebody made a point, and in response, he stamped his fist on the table and said, "That's not very ballsy of you." And I think beforehand. And the woman came out afterwards and said, before this but they speak like that all the time. But I never noticed it before. I just thought, well, they're just a bit, that's how they behave. But now she's starting to put the pieces together. And equally, you in your positions, when you hear people use language like that, it's not just a throwaway comment. It actually defines the culture of your organisation. When people use language like that, when they behave like that, they are reinforcing a masculine paradigm of business. And in HR, you're perfectly, it's incumbent on you really to be challenging that kind of behaviour. The other thing there, if you're serious about challenging cultures and organisations and institutions, then for your diversity, as well as setting targets at lower levels, good practice would involve that you're setting targets at higher levels as well. So you're having that conversation with the boardroom that's all white men and saying, look, how do you want to look in 5 years' time? Now, how are we going to do that? How are we going to change our succession planning? What are we going to do to bring in, if we need to, people who are different from outside? So with regard to ethnic diversity, gender diversity, style diversity, people who haven't been to the same school that you've been to even, things like that. We've already made the point about marketing materials being aligned with the brand and values of your organisation. That's crucial, because as you say, Janet, that you communicate your values in the images that you put out, and also the people that are put in front of you. That communicates the values of your organisation. They have to be aligned, and sometimes you have to be prepared to rein in your marketing department. The recruitment. Again, not going to labour this, job-related competencies. So when you're setting out the kind of person that you want, relate it back to the job rather than your image of what a leader is, because then you find yourself coming up with words that reinforce the images that we just saw earlier. So make very sure, if we want to be really transparent and fair and be able to put our hands on our heart and say we're doing this right, we really need to track everything back to what is the job that we're doing here and what are the competencies we need. Do we need to state qualifications, or is that just we often go into autopilot and just stick out some degree in computer marketing, for example, when it might actually not be necessary, and maybe there aren't very many women with that qualification. So maybe you don't need the piece of paper. Maybe you should be building in a broader definition of experience in. So again, rethinking who might you be shutting down, who might you be excluding by the words that you choose. Yeah, we got that point there. Just a case study there. Walmart. Also, Abercrombie and Finch were both organisations, albeit in the US, that came a cropper here. They were taken to court, cases taken to court because of, and this is a reflection on HR, and HR lessons were learned from it, but they were accused, because of the marketing that they used, they were accused of racism in their recruitment processes. Their marketing the link was made between the images they used in their marketing, which was all white people and white families in their clothing. Abercrombie & Finch is a clothing retail store, like similar to Walmart, and it became obvious that they were using certain images, and a case was taken that would impact in recruitment, that the advertising that you use puts people at the same kind of points you were making, will tell people what the values of your organisation was, and they major race cases which was linked back to their recruitment. Well, if you're doing that in your marketing, it's going to impact your recruitment, and your recruitment must be racist. So that's a case example of how these things can be linked. Evaluating your managers and linking it to remuneration, that's something that was touched on, I think, yesterday. Absolutely vital. Absolutely vital. In your performance management processes, if you have objectives relating to this, then you have to be able to also hold people account. There will be some people who will be motivated by the objectives or the targets that you set for them around diversity areas, and they will achieve that. There are other people who won't. They just won't get it, or they don't see that it's important. And so what are you going to do about it? Cajoling, motivating them, hit them where it hurts, in the pocket.
I've got a question, Tess.
Yeah.
KPIs. I know we talked a little the other night about this.
Yeah.
Sort of KPIs and targets, because the kind of common perception, certainly across Europe, is that because of positive discrimination legislation, you can't set hard targets for things like the proportion of women in the workforce or disabled or
yeah.
And I wondered if you had any comment in terms of particularly linking it to remuneration.
Yeah.
What you have found has worked and what has been the right side of the law. Absolutely. The right side of the law is, it's perfectly legal to set targets. You set targets for everything else in your organisation, so why not for diversity and inclusion? Where you'd fall foul of the law is if you set quotas, and I think that's true also in Australia, isn't it? To set quotas is a very different issue. But can you define the difference between a target?
Yeah, absolutely. A target is aspirational. So you say, for example, I want to increase the number of women. Well, Shell have done it. They've said 3 years ago they want to increase the number of women senior managers by 20% by 2003. They've missed that 3 times. Yeah, they set the target, which was deliberately stretching for them at the time because they wanted to raise the bar and they really wanted to do this. Sadly, that they've failed, and probably because they're not really looking inside their culture. I think they're not really going where it needs the conversation at the very top to really change the culture from a masculine paradigm to a more inclusive paradigm. So it's still putting women off, but they set a target. And they missed it. And targets are aspirational. We sometimes miss them. So that's, it's not ideal and it's embarrassing, but you set it because it's good practice. A quota is non-negotiable. If you set a quota, if Shell had said they want 20% increase of women in 5 years' time, it's non-negotiable. They have to do it, which would actually mean in their recruitment processes for a senior management position, they would have to exclude men and just allow women to apply for that. So that's very, very different.
Sorry, can I take another question?
Yeah.
One of the real dilemmas we have is in terms of where that target is used as a quota by the manager. What I mean by that is a senior manager who knows that his bonuses depend on sort of getting a particular percentage.
Right. Right.
His own personal bonuses depend on it.
Yeah.
I've seen cases where he will appoint, it's usually a he, will appoint, jobs to meet that quota.
Yeah.
To get the bonus. And that's kind of driving the wrong behaviour.
Absolutely.
So I wondered whether you had a comment in terms of how, the holistic piece around it, how you drive the right behaviours,
yes,
the right outcome.
Absolutely.
But still get the reward in place.
Yeah.
It's an important motivator.
I think you're right, and I think where that happens, and I've seen that happen, you're absolutely right, where it happens more often than not is where there's been a directive from the UK head office saying you've got to meet this particular target. And that's seen to be almost, it's positioned as a threat, if you like, or, you know, you'll be judged. It's all about how you position it and how you communicate it. So whoever is responsible for this in the HR department or the diversity department, you go on the ground, have a conversation with this person, make sure they understand why it's important for their part of the business, so they buy into it and they understand the whole concept. Where I see that happen and people confusing targets with quotas, they don't understand the difference, and so they take the shortcuts, they take the short routes, which is the messy routes. And also what it tends to do, a knock-on effect is that, is sabotage, because it communicates, it is tokenism, and it gives the wrong message, and the person who's doing it will often say, well, I had to meet my quota, without any understanding of what was behind it. If the person understands that this is actually good for their business, this is what you need, this will enable us to reflect our customers, etc., then it'll be a very different, I see people approach this in a very different way. They understand the importance of getting it right, and not just the crude cutting to the quota, which then sets that minority person, whether it's ethnicity or gender, up to fail. They're going to fail in that environment. So that's how I do it, and it's the role of the person setting this directive is crucial. How you do your business, be inclusive, don't shove things down people's throats, don't make them feel the fear of it, make them understand why it's there. But ultimately, if you're dealing with somebody who isn't going to do it, then they do know what the fallback position is. But the other thing there, I would say, Janet, is the processes. Make sure the processes are in place. The kind of thing David was talking about, the health checks, so that because if you were operating a quota system, your processes wouldn't be in place. You have to follow certain kind of processes. How many people were involved in this interview? Do you all agree? Have you had men come to the interview as well as the women? Has the advertisement gone far and wide? There's certain processes that should be in place that you can check that it isn't positive discrimination, that it has been a transparent, fair system. And that will be really important for the person who's put in that position then, to be able to say, actually, this was a level playing field. I got this job because I was good enough for the job.
Just a comment on that, and what Janet was saying about the bonuses set up there.
Yeah.
Are there ever any measures in terms of turnover? So people go ahead and appoint these people just to make those particular targets. Then in fact what they do is start going through some sort of churn to say, actually, we put them in, we got that, but really they're not the right fit, so let's get rid of them. And so they've got that turnover rate, and does that get linked in and perhaps a check and a balance model to actually offset the fact that they put people in and then said, okay, we've got the bonus, now to get rid of them and move on to the next person.
Interestingly, part of the reason I asked that whole question is that I've seen that happen in our organisation. And it's kind of the issue between a quick fix and a systemic fix.
Yeah.
Because what usually happens is that, you know, senior woman gets appointed to meet the KPIs, we call it. But the overriding culture, the natural culture, hasn't changed. So, you know, she's there and she's, you know,
set up to fail.
Yeah. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then we get back into how do you actually change the whole mindset?
Yeah.
And it's immensely difficult.
And I would suggest that that's the reason why Shell is failing constantly, because I've worked with people who Shell, and the women will say it's a hugely masculine environment. So all the targets you like to set in the world, all the nice advertisements where you get that right, isn't going to make any difference when a woman is in that environment. She has to behave like a man to survive. So that's what I mean when I say you have to be prepared to have the difficult conversations. If you want to do this right, you have to have very grown-up conversations with your top team and play back to them that kind of behaviour that you see of stamping your fists on the table and say, hang on a sec, would a woman want to come and sit in this room with you guys behaving like that? And that's it takes courage to do that, but you know, it needs to be done.
Just one final thought, and again I'm being very open and sharing our experience here, but what we've also found is a couple of the senior women who got to that line position have got there because they played a man's game.
Exactly.
But then what then happens is they expect other women coming through to get there on the same basis.
Absolutely.
So you get that self-perpetuation.
Absolutely.
The female managers.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. Very often the women that I meet at these senior levels have behaviour that's as masculine as men, and that's how they survived, and that's how they got where they got, which defeats the whole purpose. And there's a 30% rule apparently. If you have anything, somebody who's from a minority group less than 30%, you're going to have to conform to survive. And I've seen that happen time and time again. So it isn't just about the women; it's getting enough women. So you've got to. It changes the culture. But it's chicken and egg. Judy, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, it actually works the other way, having now worked in the not-for-profit for quite a number of years. The not-for-profits are notorious for the other way around. They're women-driven. Go into the not-for-profit, and the number of men who go into the not-for-profit sector are minimal. And when you do bring them in, they can't cope because they don't want to work with all these women where the culture is so strongly feminine, bitchy. And I can absolutely understand why they don't want to work there.
Yeah. And equally, the issue is the same.
The issue is exactly the same.
The issue is the same.
Where you've got less than 30% driving the culture.
Yeah.
Those who come in
have to conform. No.
I mean, the first one I worked in, my entire department was women.
Yeah.
And I've got to get a guy and I've got to get men.
Yeah.
The poor young boy I brought in just couldn't.
He
just couldn't cope with that. We tried to support him every which way. But
a classic example.
Women in the place were constantly treading past to his door.
A classic example. Classic example.
So it works both ways.
Yeah.
I didn't want to appear like this is a feminist thing.
No,
it works both ways.
it does, but it just so happens in most society and business generally tend to be run by a masculine paradigm. But you're right, it can work the other way. Of course, it can, and the same challenges apply. Statistical monitoring that needs to be in place. If we're serious about it, you need to track who's getting promoted into different positions, and then what if there's a trend, people are dropping out from minority groups. Why? You need to do a proper analysis. If you don't have your data, you don't have a business case, and you can't have be expected to be taken seriously in a boardroom if you don't have your data and if you can't have that conversation with people. Extended to suppliers, that's a point that's already been made. Who would you give the job to? Correct. It depends on what the job is. But actually, of course, you're all very sophisticated people in this room. You know that just by looking at somebody's face you can't make a decision about how competent they are or what skills they have. But the reality is, in the press, in the UK press a couple of weeks ago, there was a whole piece about how people who are not deemed to be attractive are being discriminated against in job interviews. People who don't have that sort of conform to our subliminal image of what's acceptable are being turned down. They're not even getting past your prejudices, let alone past for you to see their CVs, because you can't see it. You're blinded immediately by your unconscious prejudices. I want to end with one exercise. I really want you to do this, because I believe if we want to do this seriously and in a role of HR, we need to be able to raise our own levels of self-awareness about what's in our minds that we've carried with us sorry, I've got to stay here, from our childhood experience. So I'm going to ask you a question just to think about. Can you think of a time in your life, any time, this does not have to be work related, any time in your life when you felt in a minority? It could have been any situation. It could have been that you were on the wrong side of a football pitch with the wrong colours on. It could have been that you were the only smoker in a non-smoking dinner party. It could have been that you were abroad somewhere and you couldn't speak the language. Any example that you can think of. When you can think of a time, think of two further things. A, how did it feel? And two, how did you behave differently than you normally would? How did it feel? How did you react in that situation? That's, you'd probably say, in retrospect, was slightly out of character. When you can think of all of those things, just nod so I know where you are. Okay. So, I'm sorry if... Robin, do you mind sharing with us your example?
My first senior HR job, I was the only woman at a leadership table of about 10. It was a not-for-profit. It's actually an emergency service, but very male-dominated. And it was extraordinarily uncomfortable, and I became far more aggressive
Right. Great example. Thank you, Robin. Anyone else want to share their example? Anyone over here?
Obvious one, I guess, overseas, Vietnam.
Oh, right.
Long female in Vietnam, you feel completely different to everyone else.
Right.
You feel watched, looked at, which
Yeah.
is intimidating in itself.
Yeah.
And unlike me, I became withdrawn.
Right.
You just don't feel like you can be yourself.
No. Absolutely. It's not important for us to hear all of your examples. What's important is that you all can relate to that. Can everyone relate to at some time in their life? Anyone not relate to any time in their life when they felt in a minority? Anyone not relate to that at all? Okay. Because actually, most of us, fortunately, don't go through life feeling like that. They are particular experiences that we can remember because they're ingrained in our mind because they were so powerful. They had such an impact on us. And the kind of things that you talked about, feeling different, feeling watched, intimidated, marginalised, they're very, very powerful feelings to feel, and in the negative. They're very often in the negative. Sometimes you can feel good about being in the minority, but generally speaking it's negative, because if you stand out, because of something about you that's different, there's always a potential of you being the poppy whose head is chopped off. When you can think of a time when you were discriminated against, where you were in a minority or treated in a certain way, it has a huge impact. And I guess for me, in this role, I use this exercise, and I do it in far more detail, and I unpick it, all the different feelings and stuff, with senior executive teams. And it's actually the exercise that has the most impact, interestingly. Once I've done the business case, and they feel safe with me, I've given them the data, we've had the conversations, the tough conversations about numbers, how the people are feeling, we've done the business case, they're feeling in their safety zone, then we move into something like this, and boom, that's when you see lights going on and pennies dropping. Because you're asking people to empathise with the most vulnerable people in their organisation. All of us can think of at least, and if they can't, some of them can't think of a time, any time in their lives when they were in a minority situation, and that in itself speaks volumes, and they know that. So if you've never ever felt marginalised, that you've ever had to defend yourself, that you've ever had to prove yourself, that is in itself very significant and powerful. But by asking people to walk for a mile in other people's shoes, and then to say, phew, aren't we lucky? We don't have to feel like this every day. There are people inside of our organisations because of something about them that's different, and it could be anything about them that's different. We can get singled out and picked on, bullied, harassed. And there are people, because they're visibly different, they're exposed to that every single day of their lives. And what I try and instill in good managers, yes, let's look at all those processes. Let's look at all those things I had in the previous slide. Great. But first of all, where you start is looking at yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself the question, what baggage do I carry with me into this crucial role? Because my role gives me power. I make decisions about other people's lives. What unconscious biases and prejudices might I be carrying into my job that impacts people who are most vulnerable in my organisation, who will alienate them and compound their sense of vulnerability? I've got to end there. I could have gone on for much longer, but I'm really grateful. Thank you all very much for being so interactive, and your experiences have been brilliant. It's been a pleasure being with you this morning. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Tess. It's said that if you're an architect, you see the solution to every problem as being an architectural one. If you're a surgeon, everything relates to surgery. As a psychologist, I think that everything relates to people and understanding them. It sounds as though in your HR roles you're actually diplomats, you're they're in the role of psychologist, understanding people, facilitating interaction, and the passion of Tess's involvement really came through. I think that we all felt how powerful her commitment is, and that is no doubt why she's such a superb practitioner, and why that was such an engaging presentation. So thank you so much. It's time to change now, to switch to the next presentation, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Sharon Jackson to lead this session. So, good morning, Sharon.
Hello, Wendy.
Now, you need to load that in. Okay. Well, I'll let you.
Technology works.
I'll let you do that. So, if you can still hear me, I might just shift the mic across a bit. Sharon's going to be talking about the greatest challenge of today's employers: recruiting and retaining quality employees. So how CSR is enabling employers to keep, engage and excite their greatest resource. And she's going to be showing us case studies from around the world. Now, I don't know how you feel about case studies, but I love them. I mean, they really give life and vitality to any presentation. So that should be terrific. Now, while Sharon's setting things up there, I'll just tell you a little bit about how accomplished she is. Managing Director of Carlton CSR and a visiting lecturer at the Cranfield School of Management in the UK, of course. Since 2000, Sharon has been a management consultant in the area of cultural change, teaching business how to combine fundamental best practice and corporate responsibility as a facet of global sustainability. She designs groundbreaking corporate responsibility leadership programs for senior executives and boards, which sounds just fabulous. I'd love to be at one of those, to enable innovative leadership of profitable and responsible business, whilst contributing positively to the environment and society. And these pioneering programs are held in the French Alps. I'm even keener to be there, and the Tasmanian wilderness. Australian clients include companies like Abbey National, IAG, ABC, Orange Telecom, etc. So an impressive client list, and I'm sure we're in for a very entertaining and useful session.
Thank you, Wendy. Well, the first thing to tell you is that I'm losing my voice. I've been talking non-stop for 4 days, so excuse me, I'm croaky, which is very unlike me. I have got a few slides to show you. But we're a small group, which is great. I have a few slides. I'm a little bit PowerPointed out myself. I've got through 300 so far in the last few days. I've just got a few to set the scene and some case studies around some research that's been done in Great Britain just recently. In fact, it was launched just before I came away at the end of October. What I would like, with your permission, is to have a discussion about how to embed HR practices at the heart of CSR. Because my feeling, and you can contradict me, is that in the UK we're starting to have some quite interesting forums around this and some research, and there are groups of people getting together to actually discuss and share how to embed HR practices. When I come here to Australia, I find it quite difficult to find similar groups and HR practitioners who actually know how to get their name even noticed on the CSR agenda. Quite frequently it lives in either health and safety or marketing and PR. And the HR departments, I think, are finding it quite difficult to say, yes, we should be part of this revolution. So with your permission, can we do that around more of a workshopy, flip charty type, more creative and innovative? Would that be all right? The other thing is, I brought for you guys, and some of you were in the discussions yesterday about measurement of Mission Australia. We may well, hi Naomi, we may well end up talking about some of the way that we've involved HR at Mission Australia. There's an article here I wrote about the Corporate Responsibility Index, and the fact that an index and benchmarks only benchmark. It's what you actually do in the organisation that matters. And again, HR is absolutely the centre of that, so help yourself to read those. I also will be referring to an article I wrote for Chartered Institute of Personnel Development about HR at the centre of CSR, some steps and how to. Again, if you want copies, I have printed loads off, because don't waste paper, do we? But if you want a copy, I can happily email that to you. And also one that I wrote for the Chamber of Commerce of New South Wales, again about actually taking the facets of CSR to the heart of the business, not just reporting on it, not just talking about it, but actually taking it to the heart. And at the end of the day, if it's not about people, what on earth is this all about? How can HR have been quite marginalised in this whole revolution? I don't know how that's happened, but I think if we can start talking about maybe some initiatives around Australia to try and stimulate that change effectively. So that's what I've got in my mind. And if we can do it informal, that would suit me today. It's like my last day, I'm getting into kind of wind down mode at the moment. So is that all right with everybody? Okay, I'm going to be referring to... Actually, can you hear me? My throat is getting croaky, but can you hear me? Good. I've usually got quite a loud voice. I'm also very good at karaoke. I'm going to be referring to this report, Making CSR Happen. Are you familiar with the organisation, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, CIPD? Are you familiar with that, CIPD? What do you have in Australia that's similar? I'm sorry?
Australian Human Resource Institute.
The training?
Australian Human Resource Institute, ARI.
Okay, and what are they doing in the field of CSR and HR?
Nothing that I've seen.
Nothing yet. So that might be when we start flip charting a route that we can actually start to perhaps pursue in terms of getting on their agenda. So my conflicts here. Make sure I start talking to you about supply chains and okay, so that would perhaps be a good start. So everyone's talking about Generation Y. They seem to be, as the next, obviously, recruitment pool. And it is discussed that Generation Y are going to be looking for different values in terms of their workplace meaning. So, motivated by deeper things than money, materialistic, success-driven, image-conscious, do not believe everything they see and hear. Well, I'm a baby boomer. I think appeals to me as well, quite frankly. But it's not just about Generation Y, and I think sometimes the debate loses itself when we concentrate purely on this group of people. It's also about retaining your Gen X's and your baby boomers and training those people in this revolution. So I was talking to Kerry Baxter, who some of you might know from Swiss Re, and she said what they've seen in Swiss Re from an HR perspective, sure, the Gen Ys are coming and asking the questions, but what it's doing is opening the door for others who haven't previously felt it right to ask those questions. So it's all the generations, it's not single generation at all. This is from Peter Shane's book. Have you seen that one? Bright red cover. It's a very good book, actually. It lays things out quite clearly. So exactly, it's called Thriving, Surviving with Gen Y at Work. It's one of the better written books I think I've seen on this subject. So change, this is quite a key thing, the change, isn't it? They want it, they thrive it. They feel very comfortable with it indeed. And that actually, again, if Swiss Re are right, the Gen Ys are the people that we should be using to open the doors, to enable other HR practices, to enable organisational development and change. We should be using them as vehicles in terms of this new way of thinking and this questioning. But also the loyalty to the employer. I thought that was quite interesting. Give me Saturday off or I'll quit. You know, middle baby boomers like me. Oh, I want to work really, really hard forever and ever. And if I don't work hard, my dad said if I don't work really hard and nearly have my knuckles bleeding, I will never be a good girl. That's the old way of thinking.
I'm wondering, is this in the UK?
Peter Shane is American.
Pardon?
He's American.
American.
He's an American guy.
Is it global?
Is it global? I suspect it can't be. Thinking of cultural differences in different parts of the world, the answer is I don't know. Does anyone know? I'm not actually a Gen Y expert at all on this.
I think this is applicable to Australia.
Australia, perhaps. What we call Western societies. I'm not sure that you could apply this in Asian cultures, for example. Anyone got any view on that?
Asian cultures are changing.
Well,
dramatically, but a lot of it's because of the influence of the culture, the films and so on, which these things are possible.
Yeah. Don't know. I haven't actually looked at any research on Gen Y globally.
A colleague and I recently did a syndicated study for the pharmaceutical industry on baby boomers and their attitudes to health.
Okay.
And we looked either side of that to the depression generation or the lucky generation, and then younger than that. And I think that the general belief is that it's relatively applicable throughout the Western world, but there wasn't necessarily a baby boom in Asian countries at that time. So I think we can be pretty comfortable with the stuff that we would be talking about.
The drivers in some other parts of the world for individual values and happiness are quite different, aren't they? They're quite different. So I would say I would say, I'm guessing, as Wendy's saying, it's with the Western world type. I mean, I'm not going to spend too long on Gen Y because it's not my area of expertise, but clearly within the HR provision, Gen Y must be considered as one of the next pools of talent, and certainly the people I teach at Cranfield on the MBAs fall into this group, and the kind of interaction I get with them when I'm just teaching them the traditional CSR implementation work, the interaction is phenomenal, very questioning, very delving, and as the slide said earlier on, they definitely don't just believe everything I show them or tell them. They will say, why Sharon, give me an example, I want to test that and understand it more. They're not just all seeing, all believing. So we accept this is one part, it's only one part of the whole HR role in the CSR entity. So this is the report that I'm referring to. It isn't free. If you want it, you'd have to buy it. I think it's about £30 or something like that. But I'll be giving you the CIPD website, and you can go on and see some synopsis of some of the case studies. You can access some other case studies. This was actually commissioned just this year and was released, as I said, in October. CIPD.co.uk, 12 case studies in conjunction with our Department and Trade and Industry CSR Academy. Now, what we do have in the UK, as I've been saying for the last few days, is quite a lot of collaboration now between organisations like Business in the Community, Institutes of Personnel Development, the government, NGOs and business. And my feeling is that's why we're starting to really to make some headway here in organisational change, is because of that collaboration and that openness to share knowledge. And I think in Australia that's happening now, but in the last few years, as I've said before, people have taken the knowledge around CSR as competitive IP, if you like, and knowledge is power. But I'm seeing much more of a sharing now, and I genuinely believe that HR getting into that role of sharing the knowledge will start to really unravel some of the barriers we're getting in the organisational development around CSR in Australia. So the DTI CSR Academy have produced a framework. This is completely free. You can download this from the website. Completely free. And it will actually, it's a PDF that will actually look like that. So essentially, the report of the case studies is around how businesses are starting to actually use this framework, and this is, HR is absolutely the heart of this. Okay, did you get those addresses down? So, this framework, which you will download for absolutely free, is based on the concept of moving from awareness to leadership. Now, there's a model. I haven't been able to show anybody yet because I haven't had a flip chart all week, but there we go. True trainers always refer to flip charts, don't they? The model that I use is companies come in at this point here, awareness. An intent. They have an intent to engage in the CSR sphere. They hear all about it. You can't help but hear about it. It's happening around us all the time. So they have this intent here. Very frequently, they move to this position of tactical. Who do you think what a bit of tactical CSR would be? Doing the surveys. Doing the surveys? Yeah. I'm sorry? Compliance.
Producing a glossy report.
Glossy. Yeah. PR. Going straight to the media, going straight to PR and saying we're fantastic. Actually, cause-related marketing, I have to say, I was pretty tactical. Cause-related marketing, I'm really strong on this, is not corporate social responsibility. It's a marketing end to me, where also a charity and cause also benefits. I'm very strong on that feeling. But some businesses manage to get here. And here is the clue. The strategic bit. Only then, and actually Ava yesterday said about, what was he saying again and again, culture. got to be the culture of the organisation. So some businesses stay around intent and awareness. They talk about it forever. And you can think of, I can think of organisations in this country, they're still in this awareness, and they actually start talking about it quite publicly. They might do a little bit of tactical, they might have a good CRM, they might have a little bit of a glossy magazine, but the first time the organisation does something not quite right, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Age, are going to go, whoa, mate, you really aren't doing this, and they're going to get pretty negative press, aren't they? Their reputation be quite damaged by just flapping around in the tactical if they're not committed to the strategic. So, what in fact the DTI framework is saying exactly the same. Let's get organisations from awareness through to a leadership position. And I would argue you do not do this unless you engage HR absolutely centre of every single initiative. That's where I come from.
It's assuming that HR leads culture.
It's assuming that HR leads culture. Well, okay, so they have to lead it?
I think you're making the assumption that HR's, not all organisations, but I would say in Australia, HR have a huge influence.
Okay, but they certainly have a component aspect. I accept that they're not always going to be the leading style. I accept that. Some are, some aren't. But there's certainly got to be, because that's by sheer nature of what HR does.
I think that begs the question of what HR actually perceives its role. Unfortunately, a lot of the large corporations, HR is about hiring, training and firing, and not about organisational transformation and design.
Okay.
And so the HR perceive themselves differently. Because I've had this argument with the Institute. I have a long notice from the outside, hoping it will stick.
Well, it sticks, I think. Well, okay, that is very interesting, the view of HR. I mean, has there been a movement in Australia of outsourcing HR? No? Okay.
Payroll.
Yeah.
Payroll.
Payroll. Okay. Well, the one thing you did say is training. So if nothing else, even at that kind of operational day-to-day level, HR still, within the training capacity, still actually has an opportunity to contribute to that. Maybe that's the routine. Maybe when we do our flip charting, maybe that's one of the routes to get HR at heart of this, is getting in the training program. I don't know, we'll do that in a minute. But essentially, what the DTI framework says is exactly the same. Let's move from awareness. So I'll just read this. Please do download. It's completely free, and it's a really good starting point for how to actually embed and integrate, because that's what we're talking about over 3 days. We don't want to talk first. We want to go back and do something tangible, something practical. Awareness, the broad appreciation of core CSR characteristics and how they might impinge on business decision making. Yeah. Understanding, a basic knowledge of some of the issues with the competence to apply this to specific activities. Could be tactical, applying some of the issues in some of the places. Application, the ability to supplement the basic knowledge of the issues with the competence, and HR surely must be a part of employee competence issues, to apply to the specific activities. Integration is when we start to get to the strategic there. An in-depth understanding of the issues and the expertise in embedding CSR into the business decision-making practices. Leadership, the ability to help the managers across the organisation operate in a way that fully integrates CSR with the decision-making process. Across those attainment levels, 6 different areas. I think they stand. I don't need to read those out to you. I'm sure you can download and read those yourself. All the things we talked about: building capacity, the society, stakeholder, harnessing diversity. Absolutely critical. I'm sure Tess made that absolutely clear. Absolutely critical to this whole embedding process. So the 3 companies I'm going to quickly introduce you to their case studies. We've only got half an hour. I do want to get the discussion going, because I think that's much more important than me just speaking at you. You can read all this stuff. You can find case studies galore on the websites. You don't need me to talk to you about it, really. But there are 12 in there, and 3 I'm going to run through. EDS, you'll know EDS here in Australia, the IT company. Yeah, do most of you know? IT Solutions. B&Q was referred to yesterday, so I thought I'd bring that back into the sphere. B&Q is our largest DIY chain, a bit like Harvey Norman's, would you say? No, what's Harvey Norman? Bunnings, that one. Yeah, exactly those. And then British Telecom, because we have Janet here, and they're featured here in these case studies. So their focus, as you can see, is quite different. EDS, it's about embedding the culture. EDS have had some issues around recruitment and retention, well, certainly in Europe anyway. B&Q is purely about employment, and Tess, for example, mentioned yesterday that they, or maybe it was the day before, because we've been here weeks, haven't we now? She mentioned about someone at B&Q had celebrated 90th birthday. Do you remember that? And she was saying the media coverage of that, they couldn't have paid for it, you know, it was phenomenal. So employment, very important driver. For BT, it's about the marketplace. Although I have to say that the CEO of BT, I heard him speak at the Business and the Community Conference a couple of years ago, and he said, BT do this because the first thing is it's the right thing to do. The second thing, our stakeholders demand it. The third thing is that it's good for business. But the first thing for BT is it's the right thing to do. Interesting. So EDS, what did they do? Let me just remember what their driver was for this. Said it was their... Okay. EDS, yes, so embedding the CSR behaviours using the DTI's CSR competency framework. So essentially they championed global CSR through HR. HR absolutely at the beginning of the whole process, and that was through the learning, the e-learning course. So based on that framework, a global learning which they actually started across the whole the managements of the whole organisation across the globe. So the e-learning objectives: to understand what CSR actually means and the importance for the organisation. Because obviously we keep saying the whole issues around corporate responsibility are different for every single organisation. So that e-learning tool is ensuring that the business case, the values are absolutely clear for every manager of the organisation. So the objectives are how to communicate to the stakeholders and engage the stakeholders, recognising diversity comes up again and again and again, and how to actually apply an understanding of the key aspects into the business strategy. So again, taking it to that peak there of the triangle. Oops. The outcomes. So the European Works Council are supporting this initiative, and in fact it was the European Works Council that first recommended that EDS looked at the CSR journey, because they were actually doing a bit of tactical stuff, and they had some quite bad issues in terms of staff retention and recruitment. So they were doing the tactical, doing all the glossy stuff, but actually inside the organisation there were HR issues, they were losing their people, which is costing the business money. The credibility has started to be raised, and especially in recruitment terms. People are now starting to talk about working for that organisation. I'm talking about Europe here now, a European point of view. I don't know what it's like here in Australia. Started off with the key decision makers. Start with the people at the top. We're hearing again and again, if the people at the top don't understand, you can do all the great work further down the HR line, do fantastic work, but you're likely to come across lots of barriers. So unless you have the broad understanding of the management team, it could be sabotaged later on when you need resource or you need some kind of support for the programme. Previously, CSR initiatives were uncoordinated. They were working at the tactical, which actually probably did them some more damage, because they were talking about doing these great things, and then there was an incongruence in the organisation. BT, their driver was marketplace, so good practice to protect and build reputation. That's why they've engaged in these initiatives. So we know BT, 108,000 staff, of which 98,000 in the UK. The fact is that the board are so closely involved in the issues, and I think that Janet's made that quite clear, hasn't she? The BT's Director of the Group Corporate Responsibility has support from a dedicated CSR team and reports into Group Corporate Affairs. Operating teams, including HR, are involved with developing and reviewing the whole CSR strategy. So HR is one of the components of the whole strategy. Social, ethical and environmental matters are incorporated into every director's induction programme. Every director's induction programme. That is an HR matter. And into the day-to-day management of the business. One of BT's key performance indicators is awareness among employees of the statement of the business practice branded The Way We Work. This awareness is surveyed annually in the UK, and in 2004 measured 84% of employees understood the way they work in terms of the CSR principles. And they have something called the Golden Guarantee. I don't think Janet's touched on this so far in the last few days. This is quite impressive. And this, sorry, I forgot to say, one of the drivers around this was about BT looking to offshore, and I think Janet touched on that yesterday, offshoring their call centres to India. That was one of the initiatives, the drivers for this. So around this golden guarantee, no one would lose employment unless they wanted to. That's a very significant statement to make, isn't it, to your employees? That must be one of the key aspects of an employer of choice. HR worked with the line managers. HR were absolutely critical to this in helping to redeploy and retrain where possible. There were no compulsory redundancies. Again, quite unusual, isn't it? Staff views were sought to involve everybody. Now, I know that not everyone was happy still. You know, just because you have a golden guarantee like this does not mean every single individual across BT is going to, yeah, we love all this, it's absolutely great. It doesn't happen that way. But at least they've done the due diligence and the due process in terms of actually engaging HR at the point of this quite significant organisation and strategic development. Other things that happened, the board director visited every site, early talks, one agreement with the unions. I mean, the unions had to have a very significant role in this process. That actually any offshore roles would be subject to the ETI, ethical trading initiatives and standards overseas. This was the other side. I mean, bear in mind this report is both sides. It's not just a glowing, aren't they wonderful report. It really is warts and all. Do you know the organisation Sustainability in the UK? And I think here in Australia now, their comments were that this is a leadership role influencing others in the sector, and Telstra at the moment are going through quite a traumatic time, aren't they, in many ways? I haven't heard about any golden guarantees. I'm not quite sure how HR is going to get involved in Telstra's initiatives at the moment. I don't know. But the sort of criticisms, slight criticisms, were that the decision to start offshoring wasn't quite within the CSR strategy, so some of the communications may have been a bit blurred. Fair comment. And that the engagement of effective stakeholders perhaps could have started earlier. Fair comment. B&Q, we've referred to the Bunnings Warehouse alternative. Kingfisher Group, as it says there, 330 stores, 37,000 employees. These are big HR initiatives. This is a significant strategy to roll out these kind of issues across these number of people. Again, HR director on main board. Is that rare in Australia? HR director of main board? Yeah, it's quite rare in England, I have to say. It is quite rare. Usually you might have a direct report into board, but that is quite unusual. And chairs the diversity steering group as well. I mean, 12,000 to 15,000 vacancies a year, that's a lot of recruitment. That's a lot of money.
Big turnover.
Well, think of what the business is. Think of the type of business. I mean, there are businesses that traditionally have very high turnover of staff, aren't there? There'll be casuals, there'll be Saturday workers, there'll be... Well, there's also growth there. There's also significant growth. I'm not quite sure how many stores they open on a regular basis, but there is also the growth factor as well. Before they actually recruit for a new store, they look at the demographic information. Actually, all organisations should do that, shouldn't they, really? Where is our store going to be, and who are we selling to, who are we recruiting? The individuals can also apply directly. The whole recruitment process has been designed to eliminate any discrimination at any point of the process. I know Tess uses B&Q. Did she talk to you about these guys earlier on? No? Okay. I know she does use them as a case study, as good employment and good diversity practice. There is an HR advisor in every single store, and every line manager is trained in diversity. That's also a very significant HR initiative. Outcomes, of course, improved recruitment and retention. Whilst you might, still probably quite a high turnover, it's still improved and saved the company money. Positive profile, media coverage B&Q gets is just amazing. Did you digress? Did you see the Helen MacArthur doing the Round the World Challenge last year? No, she sailed around. She was I think she's the most recent woman to sail around the world single-handed, and the boat was sponsored by B&Q, and it was this wonderful B&Q sail. Every time we turned on the television, B&Q, bright orange, and I saw one of those funny emails that came across, and it said, B&Q, how can you get a boat round the world in however many days, but you can't get my kitchen to me, which I ordered 35 days ago and have paid for. That's one fun, very funny. I guess it's one of the spoof emails, but hit the spot, because of course that is cause-related marketing, really, and. New product development. So with a diverse, and again, Tess has touched on this before, with a diverse people of workers, really touching them with your customer base and understanding your customer base. Different people are going to have different desires and needs for their DIY, aren't they? So they've actually enhanced product development as well. Marks and Spencer's, we've talked about a few times. Marks and Spencer's have had all sorts of business issues over the last few years, but their CSR is still very strong and very good. Absolutely fine. It's kept intact. And Ed Williams, who was at the time head of CSR, worked absolutely hand in hand with Jean Tomlin's head of HR. 58,000 people. The two work together. All their policies, all their programs, absolutely they work together. And 50% of the management bonus linked to delivering the targets. That is integrating CSR at the heart of HR. Absolutely great case study. Again, if you go onto the website, you can find lots of information about M&S. If you go to their website, you'll see how they do that. BHP Billiton, I work with here in Australia, 40% of their balance scorecard, KPI related, to their health and safety, environmental and community standards. These are seriously embedded programs. And I mentioned before that BHP train people at induction, second-year graduate, third-year graduate. They keep the consistent training. They don't do it once. They do it again and again and again. And the programs that we run with them, whilst they're also about performance, they're also about strategy, the common thread is their CSR and sustainability. It actually touches every single... I'm sorry?
Hi, sorry. With Marks and Spencer, what are CSR targets that the bonuses are being achieved?
I couldn't offhand second. Oh yeah, well I can't hear the lady.
It's being recorded, so it'll be on the microphone. Sorry.
You have to shout because I can't hear you. Yeah. They're listed. You can look at them on the website. In fact, yeah, they're very clearly listed. And in fact, every year, what Marks and Spencers do is they specify what their target's going to be. They tell you how they performed the previous year, how they're going to do it. It's very transparent, very open. So you can see there's been 3 different principles that they have around the community, environment, the workplace, effectively. Yeah. Okay, so before we start having some discussion, because I do want 20 minutes or so to get the discussion going and talk about how we can get HR really involved in this movement in Australia. Common drivers, the report says this, we know this already, we didn't need a report to be told this, but anyway, we can keep repeating information. Most common drivers, reputation management, wish to reinforce and embed behaviours, seems to be the more driving. In fact, I would say that the reputation and PR is starting to falter under the wish to reinforce and embed. I'm seeing quite a movement in a shift in that. External pressures we talked about, and branding for staff recruitment and retention. In the report there from the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, most commonly reported benefits, of course, recruitment and retention. It has an absolute bottom line dollar value, doesn't it? And I'd love to see some research come out of some of the HR institutions around that, to actually what the value is around those that retention rate. Improved staff commitment and advocacy, bound to have a value to the business, and great awareness of risks and opportunities. I don't need to read that to you. I'd like to get on to some discussions, I think. Be more useful. So another model I can't use this.
Unless we move that across to there,
yeah,
I wonder.
You can do, yeah.
Do you want to grab one?
What used to stay on
Somebody want to grab one? Just on a bit limited at the moment.
You take your wing out of it.
Yes, that looks to be good.
Do you want to grab this questions to tell me something?
Yeah, tonight? Yeah, no, I think I'd rather. I mean, on the recruitment to retention, we're seeing more and more, as has been said again and again, that many people are actually now interviewing their employers because they want to decide if actually it's the place where they want to work. And that's reflected. I'm sorry, I'm terrible mover around, aren't I? And this is a magazine, it's a UK magazine, the Top Technical Graduate. And so even through the publications to graduates, values-driven life decisions. The first step is to understand your own values. This can and should be a deeply personal process involving a great deal of honesty and self-reflection. If you would like to pursue this, there are some tools here. Less personal and more accessible is the task of identifying the values of the organisation in which you have a career interest, and it is here that the corporate social responsibility agenda really comes into its own. Values are not universally good, but for the majority of people they are. They would like to work in a position they feel they are doing good. They value other things as well: time for family, money, friendship, benefits, responsibility and more. But an employer's reputation is becoming increasingly important. So this is the kind of material that's in the graduate recruitment magazines and journalisms. Magazines. So, for example, I have a friend in England who was a senior HR manager of ICI Chemicals company, and this is a couple of years ago now, and she was saying, Sharon, what is happening? People used to want to be working with the ICI, and they wanted to have ICI on their CV. It was a good place to start as a graduate, a good place to start your career. And she said, we're interviewing people. First interview, goes through okay. Second interview, maybe okay. Perhaps a weekend assessment program. And then at the time of choosing, many of these graduates are saying, actually, I've looked into the organisation. I don't quite like what you're doing in this far-flung place on the other side of the world. I don't want to work for you. My value set isn't congruent with this organisation. And that's ICI. Would have been a creme de la creme place to start on your CV. And I'm hearing that in banking. Banks are saying that the employees are actually interviewing them, etc. So that's the shift in this whole field.
40.
I just think it's an interesting reflection.
Well, I'm going to give you the full treatment about how marvellous Brendan is. So, Brendan Penwarden, who has an MBA as well as an ND, which is naturopath, yeah. He's a major figure in natural medicine in Australia, yay natural medicine, having spent the last 13 years researching and presenting the latest advances in medicine and its relevance to natural therapies, to health practitioners. His passion is helping people achieve their health goals. He's helped many of Australia's leading athletes achieve the performance objectives that they have through natural medicine. He points out that Westernized society is currently experiencing an alarming increase in chronic diseases, with recognised epidemics of obesity, depression and diabetes having an enormous health and economic impact. For example, obesity alone cost the US at least $117 billion last year, which is alarming. And the astounding fact is that most people will die early from a chronic disease that is largely preventable. That's obviously what really gives you the juice, that it's preventable. Brendan will discuss how the corporation is ideally poised to play a dominant role in the health of their employees, and how the company is able to assist, encourage and support people in ways that can dramatically help them, their families and the organisation at the same time. He predicts that enabling executives and workers to achieve maximum vitality, enduring loyalty and a vibrant corporate culture is the future of the modern responsible corporation. Sounds excellent. So we'll look at how we can improve productivity by improving health and well-being of our employees. Brendan will showcase best practice from around the world. And of course you all know the wonderful service that is available there, where you can just go and put your feet up on a couch and they'll tell you how
old you are.
So welcome, Brendan.
Thank you, Wendy. Sorry to put you through that long introduction that I wrote quite a long period of time ago. What I'd like to do is introduce some important concepts that I've developed over time, and that I've extracted from the research that I feel is very important to us as elements of the corporate structure. One of the things that I've been getting the feel for is that throughout this summit, people have been talking a lot about the environment, and I'm an environmentalist. I'm very happy about that. As long as you don't die of a heart attack in the meantime, you can't get a whole lot done. A number of people have been coming up to me and saying, someone said yesterday that he's trying to get something done through the public service, and they can't get it done because for 7 months the CEO has been on sick leave. Now, I'll guarantee you that the vast majority of people are not achieving what I call the health potential. Your health potential, where you'd like all your employees to be, are absolutely bursting at the seams with energy and vitality and enthusiasm, and they're going to live long, long, healthy lives. And I'll just flick through some slides and demonstrate to you that we're not even close to that. One of the major significant political and medical issues of the future is chronic disease. It demonstrates here that chronic disease is the largest causing death in the world. I'm just going to move this so I can see it. It's the major cause of deaths in the world. It is also getting worse. An important thing here is that despite growing evidence of the epidemiological and economic impact, the global response to the program remains inadequate. So I'll just frame that for you. What is actually happening, and this is very, very relevant to developed countries, but it certainly is happening here, is that in developing countries they're very concerned about what they call communicable diseases, the infectious diseases, and lots of money is going into that. The Gates Foundation and all sorts, and the World Health Organization pouring lots and lots of money in that. As many people die from chronic diseases as communicable infectious diseases in these developing countries, but just about nothing is done for the chronic disease because it's just too hard. It's too hard for us in our society. Why are we dying of obesity and heart disease? It's a crazy, crazy thing because they're preventable. And we can't even do it for ourselves when we've got all this ability to communicate and educate and motivate. In the developing countries, it's going to become an enormous, enormous problem. And financially, Australia is in perhaps one of the best positions in the world, because we're rich enough to pay for the leg amputations and the restenting of arteries. But in the developing world, that's not a possibility. China and India have more cases of cardiovascular disease than the rest of the world combined. So that is a really, really big thing for the world. And you're going to hear about this in the future, that these people are going to be dying of a preventable disease over there, and there's nothing that can be done. Pharmacologically, we've been attempting to do it, but I'll show you evidence as we go through that there's just very little that these people have got any option.
Brendan, why heart disease in those countries? Why have they got those two?
There are as many people starving as there are obese in the countries that we think about that we're providing aid to.
It's just the rich, the unbalanced. Yeah.
They're becoming more wealthy. And I'll discuss more of the causes as we go through, but that's a surprising thing for most people. On one side of the street people are starving, and on the other side of the street they're obese. And you'll see that in India, you'll see that in all through Africa, and it's a very important factor for the economics of that country. So it's been calculated that chronic disease contributes to 60% of the 56 million deaths. So 60% of all deaths on the globe are due to chronic diseases. And it's likely to increase to 50%.
56 million per annum?
Yes, per annum in 2001. So that's actually got worse.
Yeah.
And it represents 46% of the total global burden of disease, and that's going to increase to 57.
If old age, do you naturally get chronic diseases, or do you just
You do.
old age?
No, you do. Ageing is directly associated with the incidence of chronic disease, and even that's kind of largely understood but somewhat not understood. Arthritis and all that type of thing does increase as you get older.
So it's natural that a large chunk of deaths are related to chronic disease, but you're saying they're also related to early deaths.
Yes, well, typically the research looks at the deaths per 100,000 population. I'll show you some of those, and it's just going like this. And the disappointing thing is that it's preventable. That's the most disturbing fact about these chronic diseases. 7 out of 10 people in the United States and Australia, where it says the United States, the same as Australia, 7 out of 10 people will die of a chronic disease that is preventable, and they will die earlier, and they will have... When we talk about death, I mean, death is not great. But worse than death is having a really shabby, ordinary, restricted life all the way up till the end point. So that is not reflected, and it's not easy to identify and measure that type of impact on people's lives and their families and their work performance. Now, this is a very important thing. We have in fact been getting healthier over the last few decades at a rate in the early 90s of about, what does it say? 1.5%. Now, that rate of increase in health has actually just stopped and will turn, and we're going to go backwards. So we've spent, and the cost of the economics of our healthcare has just got to a point where we cannot spend money. So we're doing something very, very wrong. We're going to start to go backwards, and there's no cash to put into this anymore. It's full. So that reversal of our health status is going to be a very big thing for us in the future. For the politically, medically, they're up against the wall. There's nothing they can do. So my major point today is this, is that who is going to step in and do it? When governments and doctors and the AMA, they try to attempt to modify this trend, they're talking to the whole populace at once, and it has to be a very conservative, achievable, distance mediated intervention. My feeling strongly, very strongly, is that the corporation is ideally suited to look at their people, assess their people, and monitor them over time in a contained, individually specific way. Huge opportunities there to arrest this preventable condition. It's just quite extraordinary that people haven't actually heard about it at this time. Doctors know about it, your politicians know about it, and they're just keeping quiet. You may have heard stuff in the media about the cost of the pharmaceutical. I'm not going to say that on.
Current generation of children will be the first ones that die.
For the first time in the history of humankind, the children will be dying before their parents because of the increase in obesity. I'll show you some alarming figures. I got no shortage of statistics on this, by the way. Now, you may fit into 90% of the people in this country that have one modifiable risk of the number one killer in the country. 90% of people. Now, if you go to your workplace, they're actually probably overrepresented because of the stresses, and the obesity generally is higher in people that are stressed. I'll talk to that about a bit more. 90% of Australians have at least one modified risk factor for heart disease, stroke or vascular disease. That's an alarming, extraordinary thing that can be fixed, often just like that. I do it routinely, all the time. There's a demonstration of the chronic diseases. That's just a slide showing that it's going to jump up. By 2020, 50% of all deaths, 50 million rather, deaths in the US will be due to chronic diseases. This is the breakdown. It's typically cardiovascular and cancers. Those two dominate. I'll just make a point on those. They're preventable, but what's causing them? If I sat someone down and asked them, what are your current behaviours and risk factors for cancer? You don't really know. If you're non-smoker, what are you doing and what could you do to prevent cancer? What are you doing that's causing heart disease that you could change? People generally don't know. So if I can identify someone's risk factors for cancer and heart disease, identify the major factors that they're contributing to that, and identify the highest payoff activities, you can dramatically reduce your risk of these preventable conditions with very simple interventions, as long as you have the time and the resources to do that. And can you see why an organisation is ideally suited to dramatically affect the life of their employees? Their life, but also their family's life and their family's health, especially their children's health. And we'll get to kids in a wee bit. The major actual causes of death, it's still tobacco, that's the number one. It's extraordinary. Some people still smoke cigarettes, so just poor diet and exercise, alcohol use. So those top three represent the vast majority of causes, and they are easily, clearly amenable to intervention. We can think of chronic disease as being a transferable or an infectious almost condition, because as soon as Western culture arrives in another country or a community, they catch the chronic disease bug almost. So we've got this explosion of obesity in children. Why is that? Have children suddenly become gluttonous and lazy? Have parents suddenly become irresponsible? Or are people being railroaded into this pattern of chronic disease that's actually transferable? You can think of it as infectious. And people are blaming parents for these fat kids. And really, the parents haven't changed. Genetics haven't changed. So what's changed? It's your whole societal structure has changed. And it's reduced activity, it's dietary changes, it's stress, it's PlayStations, it's a whole group of things. But I think that's playing on parents too, with these really fat kids, and they're struggling and they don't know what to do with them. I'm going to skip past this one. This basically says that this is the cost one. Can I just say that it costs heaps? Chronic disease just costs an enormous amount, and the major cost really is the consequences of these chronic diseases. The consequences of heart attacks is very expensive, strokes are very expensive. All those downstream effects of these chronic diseases are what's costing the community, all of us, and the medical system a huge amount of money. Diabetes costs $132 billion in the United States a year. Smoking, 75. 300 billion was spent on cardiovascular disease. There's the increasing burden of diabetes. Clearly dramatic. There seemed to be something happened in the 80s, 90s, where it really started to pitch up. And that was quite a significant time for us, technologically. We started to get access to a whole lot of games and computers and Stranger Danger and a whole lot of stuff. And interestingly, there was a change in a particular food substance that was introduced around that time. And it's high fructose corn syrup. And that was added to that replaced sucrose in soft drinks. Now the interesting thing about high fructose corn syrup is that doesn't need insulin to get into cells. That'll flux straight into a cell and get converted to fat. So it's one of the cheapest but one of the most dangerous forms of sugar. And if there's one thing you could do to your kids, is ban soft drinks. It's the absolute number one thing. They've identified the major causes of obesity, and major intake of kilojoules is soft drinks. So that sugar that'll perfectly mirror that. There are obviously other factors, but that's a big one.
Is that the fizzy drinks, or is that the cordials as well?
All of them now.
Right.
Yeah.
So, was saccharin less harmful than...
Saccharin's less harmful. And I teach natural medicine to naturopaths, and they throw their pens at me. But really, honestly, saccharin is less harmful. It causes perhaps that much cancer, but the fructose is causing this much obesity and diabetes. So you've got to measure that up and decide, what are you going to do? The other option is to have fruit juices and other more nutritious things. Anyway, there's diabetes. Diabetes is something that is one of the future of medicine is going to be strongly diabetes focused. And 2.8% of all the people in the world have diabetes, and that's going to grow to 6.5%. That's almost 300 million in developing countries who we don't typically think of. So if you're a global organisation, that's something you really need to be aware of. Now this is really alarming, and this is I'm really surprised that this hasn't come through the media. In China, when was it? Between 1986 and 1999, circulatory diseases increased about 200 to 300% in 35 to 44-year-olds. Anyone here in that age group? Large part of the workforce is in that age group. 200 to 300% increase in 13 years. Now that should send off alarm bells all over the world, and that's going to keep going. During the same period, cancer increased between 100 and 200%.
Do you think it's just because people are not eating as many whole foods and processed foods? There was a simple thought about that.
Yes.
Is that a bottom line?
Diet is a major part of it. The low-fat concept didn't work. It didn't touch cardiovascular disease. So it's not low fat. If you have a low fat diet, you have to get your kilojoules from somewhere, and it's hard to get it from protein. All that's left is carbohydrate. So we've become a carbohydrate consuming society.
But isn't whole food
otherwise what? Just because that's that sort of the Western versus the old Eastern tradition.
Yes, certainly. I think that the major increase in carbohydrate is contributing to the cardiovascular disease. The whole food issue is probably more related to the cancer. A lot of the elements we have in food are remarkably anti-tumour. So when you move away from coloured fruits and veggies to a white bun and a slab of cheese, you're missing out on a whole lot of nutrients. Epidemiologically, we can't tease apart the impact of individual components of the diet very easily. So that hasn't been really well researched. So whole food is difficult. What is a whole food? I don't have the data on it. And so obviously it's a component. It can't not be. The change in the macronutrient ratios, however, is certainly a very, very big factor. And the more sugary, sweeter, lots more bread. Carbohydrate. I'll get back to carbohydrate. Is that too loud? Should I move it away a bit? Okay. The diagnosis of diabetes, most people have it in their prime of their working life. A lot of executives, I'm going to stick my neck out and say the majority of executives are close to pre-diabetes. And when you're a diabetic, you've got typically high insulin levels. Now insulin has an interesting effect. It switches off fat metabolism. Because the insulin is saying to the body, you've got to use up your glucose, don't touch fat metabolism. And that's why obesity and diabetes are so closely interrelated. So if you can't burn fat, you're going to put on fat. But the important thing is this, is that we're all using fat as our principal fuel now. And if you can't get access to that, your energy levels, they drop. And we've got a program where we take people off carbohydrates. There's about 20 grams of carbohydrate, which is very little. And we reduce their energy intake. And within 2 days, their energy just goes through the roof. They feel unbelievable. And the only reason is that they're switching on their access to their stored fat, and they burn fat. So carbohydrates are switching off your ability to access your major everyday fuel. And fatigue is one of the most common symptoms that when people are asked, they will say, yeah, I'm fatigued, I don't have a lot of energy, feel tired all day. And especially those people that drop at times during the day. Unfortunately, that leads to carbohydrate cravings. So they go for more carbohydrate, and then you're on a bit of a cycle. So diabetes is a very, very interesting one. There's a heap of it out there, and inherently it's so easy to make significant changes in people's glucose tolerance with minor changes.
So Brendan, so you're saying largely carbohydrate modified diets?
Very carbohydrate dependent diabetes. It's also fat dependent, and the initial research on diabetes and its impact on glucose tolerance led to the whole low-fat message, as well as the saturated fat's effect on cardiovascular disease, which has eroded away over time, and we're certainly much more carbohydrate focused now. And if you have diabetes, it doubles your risk of death. So it's not a small thing, just your poor blood glucose. In the United States, it costs $132 billion. And I'll keep saying again and again and again, it's a preventable disease. It's unnecessary. It was unheard of in primitive cultures. Primitive cultures don't get menopause, they don't get dental caries, they don't get depression, they don't get so many things. And many
get menopause. Procreating to their death.
Now, menopause is a transition that they don't necessarily notice. When I say menopause,
they don't get unpleasant side effects of menopause.
Yeah, they don't get what we associate with menopause. Yeah.
Are you sure they just didn't tell you what?
They don't even have a word for it. Kids don't get acne. A direct correlation between carbohydrate intake and acne. The high glucose floating around in your blood feeds the propionic bacteria that grow in your skin. Direct medical costs of diabetes was $92 billion. Indirect costs $40 billion. So it's costing the government a whole heap. You must have heard of the obesity epidemic in children. It's just all over the place now, and it's clearly an epidemic, and it's effectively contagious. I think we have to think of it like that. Obesity is usually now associated with poverty, even in developing countries. 3.5 million people are obese. I just zip past that one. It's certainly not due to genes, because our genes don't change over in 20 years. 55% of Australians are overweight or obese. 33% are currently dieting. And you will become obese during your lifetime. Overweight. Almost everyone. 75 to 80% of people will at some time have an issue with weight and get over that level.
What's the differentiation between being overweight and obese?
It's a body fat percentage issue. For men and women it's different. And I used to know the cut-off. The reason I don't have those figures is there's no line in the sand. It doesn't really exist. I'll have a punt, and I think it's 27% for men and 35% for women, percent fat. And then they're classified as obese. Obviously it's a clear continuum. There's another factor I'll get to in a second, is that it's the distribution of fat that's even more important. It's where do you put your fat on your body. So overweight is above 22 and 33 for women, and then it goes at 27 and 35, I think, something like that. The bottom line is the most important. The prevalence of obesity has tripled in the last 30 years, and it's going to continue to increase and drive diabetes, and it's really one of the major things driving these other chronic diseases. I'll flick through that. Now this is a great one. Each block of colours represents a different age group. So the light blue is the what happened in 1963 to 70. There were 4% 6 to 11-year-old boys that were overweight. And then it goes to green in 1971, that orangey in 76, 88 is yellow, and then whatever colour that is, purple, is 1999. So that's the increase in obesity in children. And we said before, they're not becoming lazy or gluttonous, or the parents are responsible. The families are being railroaded into this type of situation.
How do you assess that?
How do you, sorry?
How do you know? Or how do they know how many overweight young children there are?
The research has done it routinely over a number of years. So every age group in children has been increasing dramatically. There are a whole heap of factors, and no one's delineated exactly and apportioned the responsibility, and partly that's because it's different for different people. The major factors are diet, and that's largely carbohydrate based, but also we're eating more. Our portion size has increased. In fact, the plates in restaurants have had to be increased because people want to eat more in a serving. And if you've been to the United States and been to a restaurant, the size they give you is just extraordinary. So it's certainly macronutrient ratios, it's certainly portion size, and then there's the physical activity. And our lifestyles are so technologically advanced that our kilojoule requirement to perform our work has decreased dramatically of late. So we don't have to lift stuff, we don't have to go to places. We've become very, very sedentary. And so I feel that's a sociological effect, that people are being railroaded into the situation, and especially kids. If you're fat as a kid, it's very rare that you're going to live the rest of your life as a thin person. You actually change physiologically. You damage your ability to burn fats via a process called beta oxidation. It somehow gets mashed up, and that's it. You'll struggle for the rest of your life. So these people are going to go on and have diabetes very, very predictably, much younger than we've ever seen before. So that's why we're very, very concerned about the future, because of these kids coming along, and they're physiologically and behaviourally very unstructured, and the society is obviously hasn't. It's not going to change too quickly to correct it either.
When we talk about, you're talking about diet and serving size and carbohydrates. But where do you factor into that the change in home life and family life, where parents, both parents working, they're coming home, and these are children. I mean, we can't talk about they're not going to be as active at work because they're children. it's the parents' responsibility for the majority of that time to feed these children. So where does the family life and structure come into that? In that the parents are not taking the same, I don't know, interest or care with what they feed their children.
Yeah, certainly. Family life is very important. It's a very unresearched area because there's a whole lot of elements. Certainly parents are spending less time with their children. They're spending more time working and generating an income. They're spending much less time cooking. A lot of units you can get now, they don't even have a kitchen. So that necessarily means the cooking has to be done by someone else, and that's always going to be an inferior food. So it certainly has a big impact, and the parents are responsible for that. But I'm reticent to blame parents, because this is across the whole community. You can't go out and blame everyone for being like that. The pressures on people have shifted us, family life, work life, away from good, healthy, fresh, various foods. And we were talking recently about food. You buy food in a restaurant, they've made it taste good. It's got sugar and salt and butter and all sorts of stuff. Very hard to not cook and find something healthy. What some organisations are doing is providing breakfast. When you get to work, you get breakfast made for you. And sometimes they're making lunch, and sometimes they're preparing a meal for the staff to take home to feed their family, for exactly the purpose you're saying there. Annie was telling me about that, and she didn't exactly say who, but what a fabulous thing to do. Because the diet is a major part of it. Outside tobacco, your diet is a major effect. And the family life and works pressures and the ability to choose convenience is a big factor. So if convenience can be made healthy,
yes,
fantastic.
It's definitely a holistic approach.
Oh, it's everything, sure.
You know, we're in the natural skincare industry. I mean, whatever your body's skin you absorb 60% of, that goes to your lymphatic system, and you have to process that one way. You've ingredients and products that affect your thyroids and all sorts of things which throw out your body. I mean, it's definitely, you know, application is in the home, and it's a way of life. It's not a, you know, we are very led by marketing. McDonald's, your big brands of skincare and all that. There's no, people don't make,
especially children.
They make
well, the target is children.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was going to say something then, I lost it. I'll come back to that in a second. The convenience. It's a societal structural change that's really responsible and affects family life and work life, and the expectations that kids have of what they eat. The foods have definitely changed. You can buy a hamburger now. I know a number of naturopaths have hamburgers. I'm not going to say where they bought it. They buy a hamburger from a franchise chain and sit it on their desk, and 14 months later, it looks like they bought it that morning.
That's on the supersize me where the chips didn't biodegrade. They just didn't. They just didn't. It was 9-10 weeks and nothing had happened to them. Nothing. What do they do in your stomach?
You can even sit ice cream in the sun and it doesn't melt.
Apparently, McDonald's is a fantastic company, CSR, right?
Yes.
But bread they use is classified as confectionery.
Food is classified as confectionery because of the bread because of the amount of sugar in it.
But you know, you look at the impacts that they're trying to bring through their salads and that's all sprung crisp. Like, you know, the reality is, someone who's an intelligent human being who understands wholesome food wouldn't walk in there and eat unless they're starving.
Well,
Poor. So
compare that to the other options, however. It's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
People don't like eating raw fish. People don't like paying for it. I guess at the end of the day, we've got to match what our outcomes are to what the real people out there are going to do. And if you've got an option between a meat and a sugary bun and a salad, I think it's a great option. But there are better options beyond that still. I think we have to start the trend moving in the right direction. And I think that's all happened surprisingly late. I would have thought that these salad options would have been here 10 years ago. But it'll move more in that direction in the future.
Not wanting to be overly cynical, it wasn't so much the health of the nation that prompted them in terms of salads.
Oh no, it was never.
Ways of
Public demand.
Of increasing market share when they were missing out on a segment of the population. I mean, nonetheless, it doesn't matter what the intention was as long as the outcome is good. I want to preempt a question here, which is, do people not know that these things are doing them harm, or do they know and continue to choose to do them because on whatever levels it's easier, tastes better, what the hell? It's going to be drugs anyway, and everyone else is doing it. Is it education or is it?
Well, it's certainly both. It's certainly, people do know deep down inside them. They know what's good for them, and yet they have short-term focus. They want something that tastes really good, and that's convenient. So they will take that option. My feeling is that people kind of know, but they don't have the tools or the understanding of where to get the right stuff. They know they should be eating better, but they're not sure what. And it's just too convenient. People are under pressure, to time pressure, financial pressure, and their options are reduced. And over time, people slip. Good intentions slip away.
Maybe there could be a radical adding to the curriculum requirements that teaching kids. It's basic to that.
And they do that. They're not allowed to sell coke in truck shops.
That's all of the education is educating the kids rather than actually changing truck shops. Because really other sorts of basic education in primary school.
I've educated my football, makes no bloody difference whatsoever. Because they other stuff in the students have school.
I look at 16 to 25-year-olds,
yes,
so much the younger skewed, and mainly skewed to 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds. You can sit and talk to the blue in the face, because at that age they're all invincible, they're all taking party drugs, they're doing that. Only fear factor is vanity. You can be fat and ugly and pimply, they'll take notice. But if you think you're going to have, cardiovascular problems,
so it always comes back to marketing. The image and culture is marketed to them, and that's a big pressure, especially for these young kids. And as they go into the teens, very big pressure to. I mean, why would anyone start smoking? It's peer pressure exclusively.
Yeah, and that's obvious. I mean, everybody knows, even the people that smoking is going to kill you.
But
and so if something is so true, I mean, you're really.
So your individuals, the youth of today, they're very heavily marketed to. They're very socially aware. The only way to change them is to create a societal, cultural change. Now, can we go out there and change a whole community's culture? Frankly, I can't see it happening. Can you do that within an organisation? Absolutely. Just come back from Hong Kong with 3 days of 200 salespeople. I switched them on to their biological age like you wouldn't believe. They were desperate they were fighting each other to get appointments to come and see us. Whereas before they didn't think about it. They knew, but they didn't know. So within an organisation, we can dramatically change the whole culture and attitudes towards vitality and longevity. And it's not about not being sick either. It's about being well. It's about being well, and it's about being well, but it's about living to see your grandchildren get married, living long enough to retire and go and still having not arthritis or a stroke and travelling the world and do what you really want to do. So we're very short-term focused. If we can stretch that long-term focus out, change the culture within an organisation, you can change people's lives, their families' lives, their children's lives, and their whole lives throughout time. Because when you're fat as a kid, you're gone. It's done already. Very hard to turn that around.
Just thinking in terms of the role of corporate and comment somebody made about parents, family life changing, etc. The whole dual working partnership, I think, brings a radically different scenario to this, where there isn't someone at home cooking, and the role maybe in a corporate in valuing people's cooking time. It sounds really weird, but like for me to actually have the time to pick my small children up who have to eat really early because they go mad otherwise, and actually get home with enough time to cook something for them before they've gone feral is extremely difficult.
Yes.
And so I'm just brainstorming, allow that in that role that a corporate could play. One of the things is actually allowing people to have the capacity to cook.
Or cook it for them.
Yeah, I mean, that would look good if somebody would.
But how much does it cost the organisation? Not a good idea. It's so cheap to make food, isn't it? You're a chef. It's so cheap to make food. And if you can give people menu options, what a fabulous, fabulous idea. Pick it up on your...
Hey, if I knew it was healthy, if I knew it hadn't been sitting in a bain-marie for a week, I'd pay.
There's places in Brisbane that do that actually.
Some... Oh, so a company will prepare it for you and...
Yeah, Nourish. You can just order with them online or whatever, and you just go and pick it up. I mean, I don't ideally do that because I still like to freshly cook it.
Yes.
But it's an option that you've got. That's all certified organic food, organic.
It's become very socially unacceptable to smoke, and there are some places you can't go and smoke, but you can just about go anywhere while you're obese. And I've got on airplanes, and they've charged me for excess baggage, and I mean, look at the size of me. I don't want any obese people on that plane because I'll feel gypped. That's terrible. Yeah, I did. I don't mind saying that. And I'm not pointing the finger at obese people as being responsible. I'll say it again, that people are railroaded into this type of lifestyle, and their choices are severely limited and constrained. And for some people, they're really, really boxed in. And these people have got no money. They're trying to get their kids in school. They've got diabetes. They're sick. And there was a program on CNN just recently of these communities in Chicago. They're obese, they're struggling, they're both parents have degrees, trying to get their kids to school, and they're thinking they're going to have to go into a refuge because they just can't get by. Now, you can't blame those people. That's a societal issue that people are rather... And we're all in that situation to some degree. Not necessarily the poverty, but the time pressures, all that type of stuff is squeezing us into it. Obesity is as bad as smoking for your health. It's just as bad. And that's something that people don't understand. It's easy to fix obesity in a structured program. It's second only to tobacco-related deaths. There's a huge incidence of hypertension. Once you've got high blood pressure, what's your option? You take the medication, that's it. You get high blood pressure for the rest of your life. The reason for that is because hypertension damages your blood vessels themselves, which increases your blood pressure. Hypertension damages your kidneys, which increases your blood pressure. So once you get hypertension, you tend to jump up, and the major cause is obesity. Sorry?
What is high blood pressure?
Oh, sorry, high blood pressure. Yep. And obesity is the major driver. And when I get someone to lose a significant amount of body fat, and it's not a heck of a lot, the blood pressure always comes down, unless they've got end-stage renal disease. And this is the cause of the diabetes epidemic. It's obesity. And it's all of these factors we've been discussing.
Actually, I wanted to say to you, I've done a lot of work over the years for the health industry, market research work, and I know that doctors, as a matter of course, they pay lip service to, well, first, once you've been diagnosed with hypertension, if you can bring your weight down, you may not need to go on medication. And they sort of know that within a few weeks the patient's going to be on medications. They kind of inform them, give them that option, but don't believe that it's going to be effective. So,
well, it isn't effective.
Where is what you do in terms of making people believe that they can do something and it's worthwhile, different from what doctors don't do when they pretend they're giving people losing weight as an option?
Firstly, the research shows that when an obese person shows up to a doctor, more than about 2/3 of the time they don't mention it. They don't offer fat loss as a solution to that problem. Doctors.
What does that say? What does that say about the medical system?
But you're exactly right. What does it say about the medical system? And they don't say anything because even if they did, it doesn't change anything. The average consultation time is 6 minutes. What can you achieve in that time? Nothing.
another appointment 2 weeks down the track. That's what they achieve.
But that's another 6-minute consultation. The doctors are railroaded into the system as well. So I don't blame doctors for a second, because they get hammered if they have too many long consultations, because it's too expensive. And the research, if you look at the research on doctors have obesity initiatives, nothing. No negligible outcome, because they're not in a position to achieve that. They don't have the skills, they don't have the time, and it just doesn't happen. So when someone goes to a doctor, the doctor is not able to help them with their obesity. So the medical system can't do the prevention here. It's just not possible. Dietitians, on the other hand, they're having good outcomes. But the patient of their own volition has to come back and see them and undergo the changes that are recommended. My suggestion is that in a corporate culture, if you can change the culture and thinking and attitude and the whole peer pressure and change the effectively market to your organisation and its stakeholders, your employees and their family and their children, then you've got real potency in the time and the opportunity to dramatically change their lives. And when I say dramatically change their lives, I mean dramatically change the way their lives are going to play out. It's no fun having a stroke. Diabetes is causing kidney disease and amputations, and we're going to see that go through the roof. So I really feel that that's a real strong opportunity. No one's really taken it up. When I say no one's taken it up, they have done some things, but I see a lot more, and I might talk to you about that a little bit later. So obesity is the cause. Most diabetics are overweight. That's very, very clear. One thing that people don't realise is all of the consequences of being overweight. They don't know that their kidneys are going to be hammered, that they're going to get dramatically advanced cardiovascular disease, increased risk to stroke, or even cancer as a major cause of. And why did cancer increase in China so much? Certainly it was the food changes, but its major part is obesity. So the programs that are being used in organisations now, I don't feel are very effectively isolating each individual's highest payoff risk factors and targeting those. Forget the rest. Pick the big one and achieve a little win, and then go to the next one. That's really what executive performance is about. We're doing a whole range of assessments, coming in, finding the highest payoff, fixing that, and then moving on, developing a treatment plan and addressing it in a structured way, which is not happening in the community. It's not happening in hospitals, it's not happening in doctors. The only place it's not happening in schools. That'd be the other place to do it, but it's not happening there. The organisations, I feel, are a good place to do that. Lifestyle causes most cancer. This is an interesting thing. Obesity is predictable. Just have a read through this one. Modern obesity is a highly predictable biological response to our new environmental conditions, because they're changing so dramatically, and is not abnormal pathology. This raises the worrying spectre of billions of pharmaceutical dollars being invested in discovering a cure for normal physiology. A cure for normal physiology is interesting, isn't it? So you can't fight this thing. It's your body's natural response. And the only way to do it is to have abnormal physiology, which is sickness. And that's the outcome of pharmaceutical therapy a lot of the time, are the side effects. The World Bank suggests that globally 12% of the healthcare budget is spent on obesity, and that's going to get worse, and it's going to overwhelm our wealth, as well as our health is going to go down, because we're going to spend more and more dollars on health while being sick at the same time. And my major concern is those dollars are going in the wrong direction. It hasn't worked for the last 30 years. Why is it going to start to work in the future? It's a completely different thinking approach, and it's cultural, it's marketing, it's a much bigger issue. All these slides will be available a little bit later. I'm not going to go through these, but it's lots of dollars. You can see them all there. There's another one. This is an important one. The cost of business of obesity. The obesity is actually costing the organisation some money, and it's a stack of money. So I'm going to leave that and just skip through. We're a little bit running.
That's due to absenteeism? Or?
That's due to poor productivity, to absenteeism. These are US figures, so they in the US medical insurance. Yeah. And injuries, that's the other one. Obese people are fatigued. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. You can't get access to that fat store. And when they do exercise, they get fatigued really quick. If you want to get people to lose weight, it's diet first and then exercise. If you're going to do one thing, you do diet first. And I'm a big believer in targeting on the highest payoff thing, and it's diet. One of the reasons, even though it's not, is sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is related to snoring, but it's not snoring. It's when during your sleep you stop breathing, and and it's strong in males, especially with visceral, the fat around the abdomen, and you stop breathing, and that switches on your nervous system, and you're in a semi-awake state to get your breathing back again. So through the night you are aroused repeatedly. Some people up to 100 times a night, and you wake up and you just feel like death. You just feel like you've not slept at all. And a lot of these people are dragging themselves through their lives and just have very little productivity. I work with a guy that I said, "There's something wrong with your eyes." I said, "Why is that?" "Because you're trying to focus." And his head's going like this, but his eyes are closed. And there's a lot of sleep apnea out there. And obese are more absent. Twice as absent as lean people. I just want to show you a few things. There's a big societal cost, big personal cost. That was the comment I made previously, that most people throughout their lives become overweight. And that's more due to their loss of muscle mass, which we're testing out there. Stressed people eat more. On the left-hand side are people that produce more cortisol, which is a stress. You release cortisol and exposed to stress. People that release high cortisol are highly stressed and reactive. So on exposure to a standard stressor, you can assess their cortisol levels. They're either high reactive or low reactive. And high reactive people eat twice the amount of low reactive people. Part of that is that carbohydrate has a mood-altering effect. And you may have seen some of the Super Size Me. Dramatic effect on mood, and you become irritable and agitated. And part of that is because your blood glucose is going like this, but also because it has an effect on your serotonin, your mood. What do you call it? It has an antidepressive effect to some degree. Even though it generates a poorer mood, the carbohydrates themselves have a mood elevating effect. Was someone going to say something there? No? This is the distribution. People with body fat in here. If there's two places you store fat, down around your hips or around your gut. If it's around your gut, you store it under the skin, and that's soft. And you store it under the muscle, and that's hard. I used to work with a big fat farmer, and he said, "It's not fat, it's muscle, feel it." And it was hard. And that's because it's packed under the muscle, and that's around your organs, and that's the absolute worst. If you decide to have liposuction, can you see the fat up here? In liposuction, they take that away, but see what still remains. The fat in the organ remains. So we can't get to that. There's too many nerves and blood vessels and all sorts of stuff in there. You'll damage stuff. So when you have liposuction, you don't take away the most damaging fat, and that's under the muscle around your organs. And stress specifically directs fat to be stored in that partition. As you get older, your fat gets bigger, your muscle gets smaller. And that's one of the major reasons that we're testing out here. We're testing your biological age, because it's a very strong predictor of how you're aging, where your muscle is up to. There are some normal weight individuals that look perfectly fine, and we call them sarcopenic, because their muscle has wasted away and the fat has taken its place, but they still look okay. And they're at a high risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. They're called metabolically obese normal weight individuals. And The BMI doesn't tell you that. Body mass index doesn't tell you that. Weighing you doesn't tell you that. A biological impedance analysis does tell you that. It tells you muscle to fat ratio. And if we take your waist measurement, we can also tell whether you've deposited fat around your organs or not. So these are the type of testing procedures that really the organisations are crying out for. They would if they knew that they were available. So that's my mission, to get this type of stuff into organisations and change that culture in a situation where we've got serious marketability, I think.
Sorry, just on that previous slide, you talked about the figure on the left, but then the pear-shaped on the right, the female one, is that good fat?
Yeah.
Is that it, right? Where it's not...
It's not great fat.
Your organs.
But it's okay fat.
I like that.
Yes.
Where it's outside the muscle.
Yeah.
Under the muscle.
So women store it here because it turns over very slowly. Right. The fat in your organs are donating triglycerides to your blood very, very rapidly.
So if there's, on that side, is that because the fat is stored on the outside of the muscle? Is that the cellulite thing?
No, cellulite's a little bit of a different issue.
Right.
So they're actually the fat inside around your organs has slightly different cellular membrane characteristics to the fat outside. So it behaves a little bit differently, and the fat around your organs is shedding more fat into the tissue and causing more diabetes. For the same amount of fat here, you will get diabetes here more readily.
Okay. So the figure on the right,
it's okay.
Isn't in the organs as such.
No, it's under the skin.
And the fat that's in your belly, it's almost being classified as another organ these days called gumentin. I don't know if anyone's seen it. I recently just heard anything about gumentin.
Okay.
And Dr. Gordon did and held it up. And it's difficult, to produce different hormones, produce different chemicals, and hard for your system.
I've got to wrap it up, so I'll just say a few more points here. Is that poor people eat poorly, and they've got this concept, or we generally have this concept that if you eat healthy, it necessarily has to involve Brussels sprouts and soy milk, and that's not the case. It costs, luckily in Australia, it costs the same amount to eat healthy as it does to eat unhealthy. That's not the case in the UK and the US, where it's actually cheaper to eat unhealthy, unfortunately. So poor people are making poorer choices with respect to their diet. So that's an education thing, as much as a cultural peer pressure type of thing. I mentioned this earlier, that low fat effectively equals high carbohydrate, and then there's a number of slides there on cardiovascular risk. 90% of Australians have one or more modifiable cardiovascular risk factors. 90% modifiable risk factors. That's just absolutely extraordinary. That we have unconsciously chosen as a society to be in that situation unnecessarily. And the amazing thing is everyone knows. Everyone knows their cholesterol's not great, their blood pressure's not great, and diet and physical activity will fix it 99% of the time. So why don't they do that? Stress is part of it, but my feeling is they don't have the structures to encourage and motivate and support and educate. And within an organisation, within a school, perfect situation to do that. My strong feeling is that is the only solution. So that's my little thing. Thank you.
Brendan, thank you so much. I mean, it was riveting for all of us. What an interesting slant on health, and I mean the kind of health conspiracy when you think of the incredible amount of money that is spent of the budget on obtaining such poor outcomes, and how there is nothing in train in health departments in government policy which is going to bring about any improvements. What I say is bring on the Brendans, and how wonderful if that kind of influence starts coming in. So thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation, and I'm sure we all got a lot out of that, and I'm sure that whatever naughty little habits we still have, we're going to stop from this moment on. So, thank you. Yeah. So now we have the pleasure of, do you have to take anything out of the computer or later on? Oh, good, okay. Oops. It's now my very pleasant, is it a duty, is it fun, to welcome Gary Wellbeing. In this upcoming half hour, he'll expand on some of the principles you saw demonstrated in his presentation coaching module yesterday, using his is everybody just having a quick loo break or coming back? Okay. Well, the lucky ones who are staying are going to have a treat. Utilising his innovative, interactive, body-centred approach to generating breakthroughs in personal perception and depression, Gary will focus in this session on demonstrating ways to overcome conflict and difficulty with people, especially with regards to how HR personnel can strengthen their relationship with senior executives and improve their ability to make a difference within the organisation. That sounds amazing. Some of the questions which will be addressed include: 1, who am I in relation to senior management? 2, how can I transform how I see my role to become more effective in implementing CSR principles, which is absolutely like the nub of this whole conference, it would seem to me. And the third one is: what key questions do I need to ask within my organisation to make the greatest difference possible? I'll let Gary speak for himself, and I, for one, am really looking forward to this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Wendy. This is going to be a bit challenging for me to stay focused on this microphone. I understand all these events are being recorded, so we'll have to practice movement within stillness here. For those of you that were yesterday at my presentation who did not get one of these handouts, here they are, from my hand to yours. If anyone else is interested in the handouts in an electronic version, email me and let me know, and I can also send them to you to share with your peers. The handout is also a smaller version of the workbook, of which the speech cycle template is in full living color and a little bit more in depth, which you can see on your way out. I leave it by my station today, sharing with Ebar here with Joe, who's sitting in the front row. This has been a spontaneous invitation. I was not planning to do this, and this was, as you know, in the Human Resources stream, to be led by Kirian Withers, who unfortunately can't make it here this morning. Given my particular style, I'm not here to lecture to you. I'd much rather stage and engage you in your particular questioning. Since there's not a lot of people here, we can do that. And ideally, since this is going to be recorded, I'll repeat whatever questions you make so that this can all be heard by whoever will be listening later. We are the players in this stage because I'm going to be asking you to portray these scenarios together with whatever questions you may like to pose. So to start off, the question that's been posed to me in being asked to do this segment today has been the one of what do we do with a personal initiative towards CSR, towards creating a difference within our organization, our family, our community, our country, our world, when we feel in some ways disempowered. How do we address people who are in higher up positions or that we perceive in higher up positions, either within the same organization or politically? This can take place on many different levels. when we see ourselves as not being as effective as perhaps the one who's in power? This is a key question. So I'm going to turn it around to you, because one of the key shifts in self-talk that has to take place is what? Asking yourself, what do I need to do to shift my framework so I can operate on an equal level with this person I see in charge? Remember yesterday, and in the notes that you have, did you get the handout yesterday as well? Here's one for you. Welcome. If you turn to the page that has the triangle on midway through the handout within a circle, the triangle within the circle, I'll explain it out loud for those of you that have seen the handout. Without the visuals here, I'm going to describe it so you can see it without having to see it in front of you. Picture a triangle with an equilateral triangle with the point facing up, yeah? And this triangle being set within a circle. This is something I call the P formula, and it's very powerful, not only for public speaking, but for addressing someone who you would like to reach your point of view to be able to agree to whatever initiatives, whatever proposals, whatever job raise and salary or hiring you would like for yourself and others. Here's one way to do it. It's very simple. I call this the P formula. P-E-A. P being the point at the top of the apex, standing for principle, standing for policy, standing for points that you're making. E, on one of the apexes below, stands for example. What personal example will illustrate your point? It's not enough to say, I need this raise, we need many more people in diversity and a variety of different populations within our employees in the organization without having some backup material. Ideally, that involves one or more, ideally as many as possible of all the senses you can include: seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, all the different senses as possible. That's the E. And then the A is the application. From your perspective, from the audience perspective, what's in it for me? Often that's what's left out. Now, if we look at this a little bit more carefully, when you're approaching someone who you may see in a higher up position, the way to encourage agreement with this person is not to focus on the examples, what I believe, or what may be true out in the field, and not to focus only on the application, what may be true for you, but to start off with the P. Why do I say that? P is what we agree on. Those working principles that allow us to be able to work together in the first place. Those policies that allow us to work together in the same company. Those points of view that we share that allow a certain series of belief systems, and including prejudices and biases in our own internal culture that we are telling the same story about to be able to work here together. So look at it more carefully. I, the example, plus you, the application, equals we. Each one needs each other, but without coming to the we first, there's often a form of confrontation and a form of me versus you that takes place. Does this make sense to you? It's a bit abstract the way I'm talking. Can you think of an example? I'd like to take one that means more to you. I want to apply this to your situation.
Persuading our CEO that he needs to champion a transformational exercise with his leadership team so that they get sustainability in that parts.
Would you say that into the microphone here so this can be heard later by the audio? I'm not sure I'm going to get all those words as well as you can say them.
I said persuading the CEO that he needs to champion an exercise to take his group of direct reports through a transformational exercise so they get sustainability in a heart space, not just hit.
Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is to actually stage this, because I don't feel like I can tell you the right answer, but I can show you a way that can be done in interacting. You've obviously had some experience, not necessarily successful, in speaking to, is it your own CEO of your own organization?
Yeah, my organization.
That's what I'm thinking, yes. in this room, for purposes of making this an interactive scenario, of which we'll all learn more than me telling you an answer, because that's not where I come from at all, would you pick someone here in this room who would be willing to be the CEO? Who could that be here? Male or female? James, how about you? Is it a man in that role? Okay, we have one man in the room who I see is eager, and he's in the front row, raring to jump out of his seat.
Yeah.
For this exercise, it's good that you come up here by the microphone, because this will be heard later. We'll be staging this together. This is the only microphone we have, isn't it? That's okay. Coming closer. So up to now, what you've done in communicating, not totally successfully, with the CEO is to say what to him?
Real, or you want me to?
I want it real. Yeah, what you've really said. Say it right here into the microphone.
Well, I haven't been able to say it to him. I've been able to say it to his report, who is my boss.
Okay.
And so to which apparently he has signed off that there's a transformational program, and I said, what does he understand transformation means? And the person in between us said, I'm not sure. So that's as far as we've got.
Okay.
So this is
so what we have to do
territory.
We have to do is we're going to have you play two roles now, not only the CEO, but one step down as well. This is what's been missing. You can't go to the top without having the segue to the top. And the I don't know is not good enough, is it? It's just not good enough. So coming closer to approach now the position of your being the CEO on one level down, and simply saying the words, asking the question, what has the top boss been willing to see happen? You say, I don't know. The words I don't know are important here. Go ahead.
I don't know.
I don't know. Let's see now what you approach him differently about than you did before, because you stopped there. You don't know what to do at this stage.
Okay.
Any ideas from you about what you might recommend? Speak up.
I need to go and speak to the CEO.
To go above him. That's,
he's gone from a principle base. So from a principle base, it would be we both believe this needs to happen. Like he and I.
Teamwork. We're going to come in and we're going to team together. Yeah. This is very powerful.
So what do you? So I need to say, well, what I need to understand. What does he understand a transformation? So that we, so that I check.
Okay. Now we're going to ask the question. We're going to do this that you can feel it in your body, not just do it in an abstract, intellectual way. Coming a little closer to the microphone. And saying, there you go. And asking the question fresh. Remember, it's always the first time. Go ahead.
Which question?
The question that you already asked, but now asking him the question that you would otherwise ask the higher up man. Exactly.
I'm not sure I'm totally getting what you mean.
The question that you wanted to the man who's in the top to answer.
So I'm asking. So what do you understand a transformational program to be that you have signed up these CEOs to?
Say whatever you like. Pretend you're in his shoes. Feel what it would be like to perhaps stand in his body.
He's quite evolved, this guy.
Okay. So he probably wouldn't have his arms crossed. Right. He probably would.
Well, maybe he would. I don't know.
No, he'd be
like this, just as she's doing, strutting his stuff. So whatever that means to you, you're strutting your stuff, and you're talking on the feeling of you two are on the same team. You are now
working together.
You're working together. There's no interruption. There's no negativity. There's no disbelief. Now you come closer to a sense of here's how we can do this together. Speaking out loud now. What you might say.
I think it's a great opportunity for the business to move forward and try and bring in some fresh ideas and new ideas and maybe change the status quo. So maybe we could approach the CEO together and see if we can influence him that way.
What's happening here?
He's giving the solution.
The solution is coming together as a stronger we than isolated individuals speaking on behalf of the entire organization. He's going to listen much more easily to two of you coming in force than either one of you individually. He has to. It means he has to somehow save face and also be exposed to more people being involved.
What he'd really say is, no, don't you worry about it, I'll talk to him.
Is that what he would really say? And he didn't yet talk to him. Right?
No, he's talked to him at one level.
Right.
But, but I don't think, not at the...
Let's explore that scenario as well. Why not? It can go in a variety of different alternative directions. Let's say you were not to come in together, but he would now take it to another level. What level would that be? Let him know so he can be encouraged to do exactly that.
So what I think is important is that everyone's got a common definition of what a transformation exercise is, so that they're not surprised, annoyed, that they budget for it appropriately. And so I suppose we need to be on that same page first before we go and see him.
So what's required here is what? For both people to be coming up with a common consensus definition. It may not be exactly the same because you may see it different in your department than you do. Yep. You're one of the many different managers that you're obviously in charge of. But by coming to a common definition, you're empowered to represent a congruency that is the very basis of CSR as well. Something that's sustainable, extendable, penetratable throughout the organization. So it doesn't stop halfway. Then he won't come back with an answer of, I don't know. Let's say you speak with him. Mm-hmm. What would you come back with at this stage? You've spoken with him. You've spoken about a definition that is consistent not only from your point of view, but one of your key managers is also aligned with you. Mm-hmm. You've spoken with the CEO, and now you're reporting back here. What do you have to say? That worked. Past the I don't know. We're taking it further.
Well, I took on board what you said and when approached the CEO, and I think we eventually worked together and got that definition clear in his own mind, so he's got a good perception of what we're trying to achieve. So we've got a little bit more consensus, I suppose, in terms of moving forward.
That's all well and good.
So I wasn't exactly sure
yesterday when I was describing the speech cycle template. Remember, for those of you that were there, at the beginning of any presentation, whether it's a talk with a one-to-one or to a larger group, it's not enough to be able to describe, well, I did the work, I described some key points, and he has now a different perspective. What does this end with? Invitation to challenge, inspire to action. What action step is he ready to take? This is what's necessary for anything to happen. Otherwise, it remains as a good idea on some shelf somewhere. Yes. Okay? So what action step is he prepared to make? This is for you to communicate now.
So he's prepared now to meet with us, and we can have a platform to actually explain to him what we're hoping to achieve and get him on board.
So I'm struggling to understand what you're suggesting to do differently. So what
any of these two approaches are fine.
Okay.
Any approach other than the one that has gone only so far, leading to an I don't know, is what I'm suggesting you do differently. Since this man is tending to, from what you've told me, want to see the boss on his own.
Yeah.
Fine. Come to that common definition together.
And let him go off and do it.
That's fine. And then he's coming back on stage 2 and saying, now the man on top is ready to see us both together.
Yeah.
Could that happen? Might that happen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that would happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Question? Comment? Yes.
Fine. What you're suggesting is that because Anne can't get to the chief executive, she actually has to go to her leader.
Because she can't speak to the person on the top, she has to speak to someone midway. That's right.
Actually, fill in with the plan so that we agree these things and we agree this common definition, and this is the action plan that we need to get.
Come up with a common definition.
Briefing him very thoroughly.
Yes.
Through getting agreements at each step.
Getting agreement at each step, exactly that.
He's bought in, to use that horrible phrase, but he's bought in so that he can then go in.
Exactly that. So her CEO is bought into the same thinking, the same definition. There's an alignment. Then we have a we that is more powerful than I or you separately. You're smiling. Something seems to have been a bit of relief.
I'm thinking that maybe the reason that it hasn't been defined is because he doesn't know what it means.
Exactly that. This is often the case. What we just heard, for those of you that are listening but aren't sitting in this presentation, is perhaps the reason that this is not taken to its next level is because he doesn't yet know what it means. So you're assisting him to come up with this clear definition together is exactly what's been missing. Often that's what's missing in organizations. People have a role, have a responsibility, but they're not clear where it begins and where it ends. Once that's clear, then your personal mission statement, the company mission statement, and the alignment to make a difference is also clear. Any questions or comments from those of you that were watching just now on what you saw, felt, or heard that shifted in this interaction? I'd like to hear from the other 3 of you that are nodding your heads.
I think it's good to ask their response. Like, I know that's probably something I don't do with my feel about it.
For the listener who's not watching, the comment that was just made is one of the things that you just learned here is to be able to not only give suggestions and coming up with a common definition, but afterwards to stop, to wait, and to ask, what is your response about that? What's your experience of that? Does that ring true for you? Would you adjust it in any way? Would you edit it? Would you add something, delete something, or change, modify it in any way? And then you truly have an alignment rather than persuading someone with your point of view and then they walk away and go, wait a minute, that doesn't coincide with what I've been believing because I had no chance to speak. So that's very important to encourage more of an active listening. Wendy, how about you?
What I liked about that was, I think often what we do in an interchange, especially if we have a fixed idea of how it usually is we stop short of saying what we want to say and expressing how we're feeling about it. So I would guess that Anne would have felt, oh no, that's really disappointing, and just give up. And what this did was to say that that doesn't have to be the case. And by her pursuing the discussion and engaging the other person, she's taken it a whole level further. And so it looked like a productive, useful exercise.
For the listener, again, you who are listening to that silence that just occurred from your perspective, what the words that were just shared here by our moderator for this morning's HR segment, Wendy, you just shared, if I am understanding you correctly, that what made a difference here was a willingness to engage the person who's being communicated to in a series of questionings and involvement, so that there's more than a communication about what different people are understanding separately, but coming to actually live in the questions together, to come up with and formulate ideas and thoughts and beliefs that can be communicated, engaging in living in the questions, so to speak. Is that pretty much what I heard you say?
Yeah, not stopping short when we haven't achieved.
Not stopping short when we haven't achieved what we intend to achieve. Going further and seeing a different approach, a different questioning, a different listening. How about you in the back?
For me, it's critical to get to the level you need to is to understand the commonalities and common ground.
Yes.
Start point. And I think too often we what's the word? We go into the roles that are expected of us in that people dynamic, whether it's family dynamic, a work dynamic, a board dynamic, and we play out the roles that are expected of us. And I think the key thing here that I've learned is actually establishing common ground with your peers, people who work for you, your board, whatever, before you actually engage in what you want to
Exactly that. What is just shared from the back then, again for the listener, is what was perceived here by another one of our audience members is to be able to come to some common ground with one's peers rather than simply hold on to one's own role and job title as a way of actually being smaller than and less effective and powerful than the person you can be to make a difference in the organization. This is true also at any time in a networking situation. If you find there's someone that you want to meet, how do you meet them? You always find a commonality. Gee, that water is nice and cool, isn't it? Something that already puts you in a place of having to say yes. From that place, it's so much easier to be aligned on the same page about anything else you would further talk about next. We have just a couple of minutes I see to go. I thought that one example would drive home one of the key ways to look at a different manner of going up within an organization, within a community, with anyone you would otherwise recognize as an authority, and somehow deny your own authority, instead of looking at it from an I versus you perspective to find the commonality, the we. I plus you equals we. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks very much, Gary, for stepping into that role, and I think that was a really useful example. I mean, it moved so far away from the theory and what would be nice and what the principles are into actually living the experience of an interchange. And I mean, a lot has been said about embedding CSR into the organisation. And it's embedded through people and their feelings and their bodies and tone of voice as much as what is being said. So I think that was extremely useful, and I thank both of you for being willing to do the role play, and great experience.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now we have another speaker. It's meant to be at 12 o'clock, so... Yes.
He probably hasn't finished it. He was talking with Jenna on stream 3, which from memory is downstairs.
Hello, it's you.
Michael, how are you?
Good, Michael. How are you? Yes, a little bit.
Yeah, the stuff that should be up there, which is just some PowerPoint slides, pictures basically. I think so, yeah. Let's check. Yeah.
That's your stuff, is it?
It's not actually, but I'll just
no,
close
that was the last one.
Just see if it's up there. Do you know what black's it on the screen? Is it a B?
Yeah. B will just white out what's on the screen.
No, that stops it from actually showing on the screen. Is it Alt B or is it Command on that bit? I might just ask. There's somebody just around the front of them.
Okay, yeah.
So you actually have to be in PowerPoint. They're up there. Right. Is that what you want? Yeah. Yeah, F5 was just to get it to the slideshow type thing. And if I hit B and B now, that'll come back to the PowerPoint. Yeah. But what's the command where I can see it on the screen but not there? Oh, okay. That's function F4. Is that how you want it? Yeah, I mean, just pick between that and...
Yeah, you'll have to keep doing the...
So function F14 is that off and on?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things, like it'll project both screens, or it'll just do the projector, or it'll do just this.
Okay. PowerPoint. Okay, and if I hit
F4.
F14 is that on and off?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, one more time. There's like 3 different options it can do.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I get into that, I didn't need it at the start, it's just I don't want it up at the start.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
We're set.
Okay.
And just by the way, Michael,
Oh, is that right? Okay. First, yeah. For a small anything like this, it would be better to... Is that a big problem if I don't?
How do they record but that's what Anne-Marie asked me to record. Okay, we're just about to get underway. So the next segment, we have the pleasure of Michael Trail, founding Chief Executive of Social Ventures Australia. And that role follows 15 years as co-founder and executive director of Macquarie Bank's venture capital arm, Macquarie Direct Investment, which sounds very impressive indeed. So Social Ventures Australia provides seed funding, commercial advice and business tools to innovative social ventures to help them find solutions to some of Australia's intractable social problems. Michael's also chairman of independent financially advisory organisation InfoChoice, and he's a director of the Indigenous Capital Fund, the John McLean Foundation and the Opera Australia Capital Fund. He's a non-executive director of Australian Aluminium Fisheries, Dimension Data Australia, Hardy Grant Publishing and Space Health Clubs. And he holds a BA Honours from Melbourne University and MBA from Harvard. Not only that, in 2001 he received a special ministerial award for service to New South Wales wheelchair sport. So what a fantastic background, Michael. And he's going to talk to us about work-life balance. A growing number of employees feel there's a fundamental gap between their work in the corporate world and the world of making a difference to the lives of others. Many want to find a work-life balance and make a genuine contribution to society, but don't know where to start. So it looks as though we're going to be in for a really informative and very valuable bit of guidance today. I certainly want to hear some of those solutions. So over to Michael.
Thank you. And I think, actually, can I let's keep this pretty informal given the numbers. And don't feel that if you want to walk out at any point, that's fine. I think in this forum and in this format to have a conversation about some of the stuff that we're on about might be a bit more fun and a bit more relaxed, because I suspect there might be a few people who've got coffee spoon out anyway. So, can I just get a quick sense of who everybody is and where you come from?
I'm Robin Smith from AGL, Australian Casper.
Yeah.
And Oscar from Legloose. Ed Richards from Earthwatch.
How are you?
And I'm Nicole Pietrucha from the Department of Workplace Relations.
I'm Wendy Bloom, Women Power Seminars.
James Lewis, I'm helping on the CSR Summit Support Team.
I'm David Square, I'm an artist.
We've got a very interesting and eclectic mix of people. I would be very presumptuous of me to pretend that I have anything particular to offer on work-life balance. I mean, what I intend to do, and let me just give a bit of personal background. I've been involved in setting up a non-profit organisation called Social Ventures Australia, which was something that I started in February 2002. And it's after a personal journey where I worked at Macquarie Bank for 15 years, enjoyed that, and a great run personally, professionally, financially. I was increasingly wanting to do other things with my time, and I wasn't getting the satisfaction out of my work life that I was looking for. So what I do, and I'm sure this is in this very informal setting, is talk through some of that, and maybe if there are conversations to be had around that, I'll be happy to go to some of the experiences. And the nature of what we're doing, and this was a big personal motivator for me, maybe for the people who come from a corporate background will connect to the same thing, that behind the kind of two-dimensional ivory towers, there are a lot of people who are wrestling with this issue of how do we connect over to our heart. The idea that there are things happening in the community that we feel strongly about, but in terms of what we do day to day, we don't necessarily get the opportunity to connect to our community. We don't necessarily get the opportunity we'd like to connect to our families. And that whole notion about how we wrestle with that and what we do with that has been something that's underpinned a lot of the work with social ventures. And just to give a very quick kind of 60-second headline view of what social ventures does, we're a venture philanthropy organisation. What does venture philanthropy mean? Venture philanthropy is about trying to use commercial venture capital disciplines in funding and supporting innovative social programs. And that's, as a point of connection for me, the business I was involved in, co-founding with Nicole, was a private equity business. We invested in emerging and early stage companies. And the idea of what we did was, could you identify outstanding commercial entrepreneurs, fund them, make money out of it? But what I enjoyed about that journey was this incredible learning experience in the 45 companies that we worked with and invested in what make good managers, bad managers, what make good businesses, bad businesses. And the whole idea of what I got to a point where I wanted to see what other opportunities were outside of the commercial world, so that challenging what Social Ventures Australia does is, can we identify in the same way as we're trying to identify commercial entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs? People who are seeing the landscape a little differently in terms of the community and driving and creating innovative programs. And I thought it might be helpful. I'll share some of those stories, because certainly what's a powerful motivator for me is the privilege and opportunity that we get at SBA to connect to and work with people who we think are changing the social map. And just in terms of very quick maths, we've raised over $5.5 million. We've used that to fund it's now 17 innovative social programs. And what's really been working in the last 3 or 4 years, which has been fantastic, is that we run these community mentor programs where people from business backgrounds use their kind of business left brain skills in helping work with some of the organisations that they can support.
So that's your own program, so you sort of put a program on top of yours supporting other people's programs.
Yeah, that's right. So the structure, we support these innovative ventures, and
part of the support is this mentor.
Correct. Okay. Sort of might back an outstanding entrepreneur running a great arts program that's doing great things in the community, and connect somebody who can provide relevant business expertise. So that's what I was going to do is just share some of the kind of personal journey and story, because I think on both sides of the fence, if I can put it that way, people think about this idea of connecting head and hearts as being, in some cases, a bridge too far. And how do you, I know I wrestle with that. I've done some things in the community sector, but I really wasn't that engaged, and I really didn't know what was going on in the organisation. So it occupied maybe 2 or 3% of my time, and I loved it, and I was passionate about it. The truth was, I really wasn't sure how much impact I was having. So, personal story. This is something I've done, which I find I get a very interesting response to. I ask people to just think a bit about where you were when you were 7, 8, 9, and just cast your mind back for a second and when you hung out with, played with, school, parents, where you grew up. Just think about that for a second. So, where were you? That's where I was. That's my dad. He coached my footy team. That's me. Actually, I should have asked if anybody could guess who I was. I've aged very gracefully, really. I grew up in Pietrucha, country Victoria, and the thing about that picture, it tells a lot about me. And when people say, "Who are you?" In 15 years at the bank, you were an executive director at Macquarie Bank, but I was Michael Trail. I was an 8-year-old kid who grew up in country Victoria in Wholman, and Dad coached the footy team. And
there was a close sense of community in the place that I remember growing up in. And I think that stuff doesn't leave people. You know, it's that old Jesuit saying, "You show me the boy at 7 and I'll show you the man." And the interesting thing is, when I do this and talk to, I did this at I don't know if anybody's heard of the World Presidents Organisation, WPO. I had to say this carefully because there's a lot of nice people in that group. But at one level, it's this group of very rich, very senior people who are inclined to take themselves incredibly seriously. Some of them are a bit up themselves, really. And when you do this, you can see that it strips away the BS. You know, it's like, this is who I am, where I came from. So that was always part of the game for me. And I get asked a lot, you know, so 15 years at the bank and then you go and do this non-profit thing. What's the story? The story personally was that, which is why the footy picture is so relevant. I love sport, complete sports addict. We had the privilege of taking all the family down to see the Swans win their first grand final since 1934, and it was huge. It was huge. And I grew up playing footy. I coached, I umpired, I played footy in Victoria. It was a passion. And we've got 3 kids, and when our eldest was old enough to start playing footy, Aussie rules, guess what he played? Now, I had nothing to do with it. We gave him a choice of sports, but he played Aussie rules, and I coached his team. I love coaching his team. That'll tell you a bit about why I love coaching his team. That did that for me. And I'm at a point at Macquarie Bank where I've been working there for 12 or 13 years. We hit all the buttons. We started life with a $50 million fund. We did reasonably well out of that. We raised a $103 million fund. And we just raised a $220 million fund. And we were working on a due diligence, which is a proposed investment in a company that was a company some of you might have heard of called Repco, automotive parts manufacturer. And it was a big deal. It was like a $20 million investment. And I suspect I'm not the only one in the room. When your kind of headlights are on and you're passionate about something, whether it's art or your work or whatever it is, you wake up at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock with this nervous, passionate energy. You know, sometimes it's a pain in the butt because you want to, but you're excited. So when I'm working on Repco, I'm coaching the Wallaby Wildcats at the same period of time, very underrated force in the North Shore. And I woke up at 6 o'clock and I'm thinking about this kid who was one of the kids in Christopher's team, cracker little kid called Paddy. And he's one of those kids who's just enormous, prodigious athletic talent, but he was having real problems at school. His dad was telling me he was playing in truant at school, you know, which is a pretty big call for a 10-year-old kid. So Paddy, and he's all sorts of issues, dyslexia, low self-esteem, but he loves footy, bloody good football, so he feels good about his footy. And that makes me feel pretty good. But he'd been quiet for a couple of weeks, so I woke up at 6 o'clock and I'm thinking, you know, I've played Paddy in the forward line, maybe what I'm going to have to do is move him to ruck rover. And so I go back to sleep and I woke up and I thought, what were you thinking about? You know, you're going to the board next week with this $20 million investment. You're not thinking about that at all. and it put me in this space where I'm thinking, mate, there's another message coming on. And the message was, what do I really want to do with myself? I actually wasn't passionate. I was bored with what I was doing commercially. I could look ahead at it. I was then, you know, my wife would have called it a classic midlife crisis, and she'd be pretty right. I was looking ahead at the next 10 years and thinking, well, I can do more of this and make more money. But I'm waking up at 6 o'clock thinking about Paddy. So I went into this sort of space for that weekend where I'm thinking about a lot of things, and it was I'm actually kind of a artistic cripple. For some reason, our daughter's got these recessive art genes, which is fantastic. And she did this. And this kind of captured where I was at, which is this notion of what life's about. And sticking with the footy analogy, for those of you who follow AFL, you know that at half-time, if you're 12 goals 6, you're in pretty good shape, and if the opponent's 2 goals 7, you're kicking their butt. And I was thinking, well, from a work point of view, I'm ticking a lot of boxes, doing well, making money, all that sort of stuff. But the Paddy thing was a purpose thing. It's like, I don't know that I actually really want to be doing this anymore. And that crystallised personal thinking about who I was and what I really wanted to be. And I ended up, for those of you who had anything to do with Macquarie Bank, there is a stereotype about Macquarie Bank which is a bit overdone, but it's not a place that takes the idea of taking your foot off the accelerator lightly. And I went to 4 days a week, and the idea of taking a day a week was, can I kind of think a bit more about this purposely. Don't know what I'm going to do, but the conclusion of the Paddy story was it's not going to be more of just chasing deals like Repco. There's got to be some other stuff out there.
How did that go down?
It was a much tougher decision than jumping ship to go to social ventures, which was interesting. The idea of it's a statement in that environment which I'd been part of, and I'm very competitive and I like to win, and I'd been part of that game for a long period of time. So the statement of actually, I'm not sure that I want to play in the same
Actually,
standard.
might not be you.
Yeah. So it was confronting. I must say that in terms of David Clark, who hired me at the bank as the chairman, is a good guy and was very supportive. As I said to him, I mean, for those who know a little bit about Macquarie and David, I mean, he does have quite a good work-life balance. He's got a range of interests around arts and culture and footy, and so I said to David, mate, you're half-time, you can't tell me I can't take a day off for work. So there were pockets of support in some areas, but it was a statement. And in that space, there was one of the extraordinary things I've had the opportunity to do, and I can frame this better now than I could then, but a guy that has been a deep mentor, it's a privilege to regard him as a personal friend, is a guy called Norman Drummond, who's Spirit of Success. He's written a very popular book called Spirit of Success. And Norman's CV is a sort of a mix of, he was headmaster of a very established private school in Edinburgh at the age of 33. He's a Queen's chaplain in Scotland. He was the chairman of the BBC. He's an executive coach. He set up a non-profit leadership academy on the Isle of Skye. Extraordinary guy and an inspirational guy. And his thing is that, and we've worked with him in Australia, and I want to share a story on this issue about Macquarie. We had a thing that Norman ran, which was a Spirit of Success one-day workshop, which was quite experimental. We had 10 or a dozen people from Macquarie Bank, a lot of whom were colleagues of mine who were executive directors, and 10 social entrepreneurs. You know, people like Jack Heath, for example, who's an old university mate of mine, set up a wonderful organisation called Inspire that uses web-based internet communication to connect to young people at risk of suicide. So, you know, Steve Lawrence is chief executive of Workbenches, which provides work opportunities for the long-term unemployed. So the kind of Macquarie Bank exec directors and social entrepreneurs. And in the course of this day, what Norman did, which I think gets to the power of this opportunity that exists, is he framed what he calls 3 questions. And he tells stories as he does, and then get a Jack Heath from Inspire to co-coach and connect to Guy Headley, who's head of private banking at Macquarie. And his first question is, who are you? And the who are you is not I'm an executive director, it's I grew up in Moore, I'm a kid, this is what matters to me in terms of my values. Really interesting conversation. And then the second question is, why are you living and working the way you currently are? Back into the conversational group. So you look at a Guy Headley and a Jack Heath having that sort of conversation. Why are you living and working the way you currently are? And the responses are really quite, you're starting to scratch something. So the Macquarie Bank people are saying, well, you know, I enjoy what I'm doing. You know, at some point I need a couple of private school fees to pay, and, you know, we're paying, but need a bigger house, all that house. But at some point I'm going to do something a little different. And the Jack Heath says, well, I'm doing what I'm doing because there's a strong incidence of depression in the family, and I lost a nephew in suicide, and I figured I had to do something about it. Jack's a lawyer, he worked for Peggy's office, and so he said, well, I'm doing what I'm doing because I feel passionate about it. I wake up every day feeling like I can actually leave some sort of footprint on the spine about the people that I get to connect to. And then the third question, so at this point you're seeing these very different conversations happening, very different conversations. And the third question is, well, what do you really want to do for the rest of your life? Now, at this point, Jack will say, well, I can't imagine doing anything different. And for the Macquarie Bank people, and for me that weekend when I'm thinking about Paddy and the footy, that was the question. It's like, what do you really want to do for the rest of your life? And those 3 questions, which come through in Norman's Spirit of Success, I think are enormously powerful. I mean, we had the most bizarre day, because when Norman came out to this Macquarie Bank day, it was really a big experiment. I had people I thought I knew pretty well from Macquarie saying, "Mate, I don't know where you got this guy from, but you know, I'm having conversations that I haven't had since I drank 48 beers at uni 20 years ago, and it feels pretty healthy." Very interesting. So I think there's a lot of this stuff out there, and the stuff that we connect to, and I'll come to some of the work that we do, because if you can trap and catch that.
Hey, can I just make a point? He asked a very different question to the one that you said. What might you yet become and do with your life rather than what do you really want to do?
That's a good pick-up. I misquoted him. That is a different question, and it's more about what might you yet become.
It's got nothing to do with what you're necessarily doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Did you invite Norman Drummond to set up that workshop?
Yeah, we do a series of things with Norman, but that Spirit of Success workshop where he encourages people to think about, as Norman frames it, it's about people trying to get their headlights on.
And it didn't necessarily require people from those different walks of life. It made it more powerful if they were together, but it could have just been in-house Macquarie.
It could have been in-house Macquarie. Our experience has been, and it comes back to the work that we do, is that where people are wrestling with this, and it goes back to something that was a big motivator for me, which was, if I go to somebody and say, and they're busy, Macquarie banker, working at Finch-Lees, whatever, and it's somebody who's got a social conscience and is thinking about these things, and a lot of people do, they really do. When I say, would you be interested in working with an organisation that's doing some really innovative, smart things that are changing the map? And would you be prepared to spend time with an organisation, with a social entrepreneur who might make you think a little differently about who you are in the world? And would you be prepared to give them some time so that they can use some of the skills that you've got that they don't around marketing, strategy, finance? Would you be up for that? And the answer is profoundly yes. And in fact, the biggest issue for us is this kind of, there's a huge supply of people who want to do that. And actually the whole process of our mentor program, frankly, the biggest organisational issue we have is that, you know, it's the python swallowing the pig. You know, if you go and have a conversation in corporate land and say, this is the opportunity, you get knocked over in the lunch, which tells us something to do. But we know when this works. We ran pilot programs with AMP and Dimension Data, which is a $500 million IT company, last year, and it was very interesting. I mean, to give you a flavour of what happened at AMP, we talked about what would AMP have been a terrific supporter of ours over a long period of time in different ways. But we spoke about this program. Andrew Moll, who's the chief executive, was there. A lot of his direct reports. There were 30 people in the room, and so the leadership thing was very important in that. And he said, look, this is entirely on a voluntary basis and up to you, but we're paying for it. If you think this is something that resonates and makes sense, we would like to support you. 18 of the 30 people signed up. And from that group, we had a 2-day induction workshop, which is a lot of this stuff, you know, what do you really want to do? A lot of practical guidance around the issues and the challenges of getting engaged in a different world and using your skills and listening and learning, not going in there and saying, right, we're going to fix this organisation, strategy, and sort out finances. A lot of the things that we've learned are the patience and the effort required to build the relationship and allowing the relationship to evolve. We had the evaluation, the 12-month evaluation of those programs has just been finalised. And what comes out of it, which confirms what anecdotally we see, is that people are seeing themselves a little differently. They're saying, and I was hoping the technology could work, we had some quotes on a DVD from a very senior woman at AMP who's been involved in working with an organisation called Pathways to Manhood. I have a particular bias on that because it's a father-son rite of passage program, essentially, set up by a doctor who's got sick of seeing young people coming to his practice boards, transitioning from happy, energetic 8 and 9-year-olds to depressed, sometimes suicidal 13, 14, 15-year-olds. So what's going on? You know, I'm dealing with the symptoms, not the cause. And he felt very strongly, based on a fair amount of homework and lateral thinking, that as a WASP culture, we're quite unique in not having a rite of passage program that recognises the difficulty of that transition, that recognises the power of men and boys sharing stories, that recognises disconnecting father-son relationships in today's world. And so, and I've been on it with my then 13-year-old son, and it was a profoundly moving journey for both of us over a week of camping in the bush with other sons and fathers or boys who didn't have a dad. And camping, no grog, vegetarian, no mobile phone, no reading material, all back to basics. We shared stories. The shared stories. The only rule in the camp is you can't lecture, you can't tell people what to do. But if you want to share a story about who you are and what you're doing, and like I was on the program with a bunch of, I suppose, kind of peers or colleagues in this sort of world. Bodybuilding is this kind of stuff at the start. By the end of it, we're all changed. We're all changed. So when you get an opportunity, as it occurs through our mentor program, people who connect and see that, get that, they get the culture of that, they learn deeply from that, and they get a huge thrill out of feeling that they can actually contribute some of their commercial and business skills to an organisation with that sort of quality and integrity. And we know what's happening because it's coming back in the feedback that we see that those mentors are going back into their organisations and they're treating people differently, they're managing differently, and they're listening, they're doing things that they wouldn't have done. And when you see that happen, there's a bit of magic in that, there really is. But as I said, one of the organisational challenges and frustrations for us is that to do that three-dimensional mentoring really takes effort. It takes leadership within organisations for that to happen. But when it happens and when it works, it's extraordinary. I mean, it's just extraordinary. So I'm conscious of the time. I'm going to be out of here at 12:30. This has been
There's no one else coming, is there?
There's no one else coming. I mean, this is such a fabulous session.
So it feels like
is he allowed to just do a 5-minute how you got from the 4 days a week to SBA? There's a sort of huge leap.
Yeah, sure. So I'm kind of hedging this space where I'm using a day a week to try and think and do different things. And I got an email from a friend, and it contained a job ad for looking for somebody with a venture capital background and a social conscience to do this social ventures initiative thing. And it was somebody who's actually godmother to one of our daughters, who, by the way, was the SBA mentor of the year last year. Extraordinary person, a wonderful person. And she just sent this email and it said, Trail, you've got your name on this, go and talk to them.
So they were established.
It was an idea, and I certainly can't take any credit for the idea. It was an idea that was the product of thinking from Rob McLean, who was the managing partner of McKinsey in Australia, Jane Schweiger, who was then chief executive of the Benevolent Society. The Smith family work ventures were involved. I certainly took risks in doing what I was doing and jumping ship, but I'm also conservative as well. And I thought one of the attractions of this was there were such heavyweight, credible people involved that I've always made life decisions on the basis of if you're given an opportunity to do something and you don't take it, if you think there's a chance you'll regret it in 6 months, you actually have to do it. You have to do it because you can, to an extent, always go back to what you've done before. And when I started the conversations, and I knew the headhunter was a guy called Ashley Stevenson from Egon's, and he's a lovely guy. I'd had 2 or 3 rounds of conversations, and I was thinking, I'm going to be so pissed off if somebody else gets this job. That sounds really exciting. So that was it. And so I started on February the 4th, 2002. The only thing I knew, and I was nervous about a lot of things, but the one thing I wasn't nervous about was that I knew that there'd be a bunch of people, really, really good quality people, who get what this was about, and while we kind of work it out as we went along, that if you get people to think about this power of connecting head and heart, and back to that thing about if given an opportunity, would you like to engage and do that? And we just had unbelievable support, and we've grown with now about 14 people working in the organisation, and this incredible support network of what we do. One of whom's with us, Lisa Cotton, who'd be typical that Lisa was the director of DDB Needham. She's had a range of incredibly senior roles in marketing and PR, and knows. And I had one of those conversations with Lisa, who'd given us a range of kind of huge amount of pro bono mentoring support, which is one of those classic pick your brain. Lisa, I'm really thinking about how we need to try and go the next step. And who do you think might be interested in this? And she said, well, this actually sounds pretty appealing. And so that Lisa's engagement has been just fantastic for us. A big part of what we now do is, as we're trying to crack a higher level of funding to support what we do. So the whole message is around the funding, mentoring tools, and how we communicate more effectively, which has underpinned us raising close to $5.5 million. Wouldn't have happened if we had somebody like Lisa on there. And in the same way, you look around at the people that we've got, it's people who are partner track, senior level, wanting to do something. You know, it's back to that, it's back to Norman's question 3. It's been extraordinary.
I'll ask straight in one more person question. How, do you mind me asking how much impact did the fact that you have probably had a good chance to make a reasonable amount of money in your corporate life have on your decision to leave? Do you think it would have been different had you been a clerk at Macquarie Bank, earning 60 grand?
It's a good question.
I don't think the calling's different, but I just wonder whether the action.
I don't think the calling's different. No, look, I'd have to say, I mean, I'm continually inspired by people who connect to us in their late 20s or early 30s who wouldn't have had 10 years of the sort of earnings that I've had. Yeah. So it wasn't, you know, we've got 3 kids, quality of life and all of that sort of stuff is part of the equation. So it was certainly a factor. Yeah. But equally, I see in what we do that magnet of, I mean, my only regret in what we do and what I did is I didn't do it earlier. The truth is I was bored for the last 3 or 4 years at the bank. So I just had this huge respect and admiration for people, and a lot of them work with us, who were saying, no, bugger this, I can't get this, I'm going to move now. It's actually profoundly not about the money. It's profoundly not about the money. And I said, that was one of the things for me. I look ahead to people in their good people, you know, in their mid-50s, 60s who've made a shitload. And a lot of them have made money. And I just, you know, you don't want to get to 50 and die wondering about that stuff. That if you've got some energy and passion about something, why wait? Why wait? And you know, the interesting thing, when Lisa and I talk to heavyweight, very wealthy funders, you can see kind of a light goes off in a lot of cases, and it's not just an admiration and respect thing. There's, you know, there's this tinge of, God, I wish I'd done something like that.
Can I just throw a question off you? So 1 or 2 key projects and outcomes you've achieved with them. Could you just...
Yeah, so just to stick with Pathways to try and demonstrate what it is we're doing. So here's an organisation where Anna Rubinstein, who founded, is a doctor, GP, and Anna will say, I'm running great programs. The global headquarters for Pathways is at Mullumbimby. When we first met them, I think they had about 1.5 people on the payroll and enough funding for about 2 weeks. Anna says, I know I'm running a brilliant program because I can see I'm changing lives and how people connect and how father sons relate. I know this is working, but I'm not a business guy. You know, how do I scale this? How do I get funding? How do I be strategic? How do I become a chief executive? Wind the clock forward 3 years. That program has grown to a national organisation. We sponsored Anna to do a week-long non-profit strategic perspectives leadership program at Harvard Business School, which is fantastic. They've diversified their funding base. They have funding from ABN AMRO, from Macquarie. They've got program and infrastructure funding that enables them to plan 3 years ahead, not just kind of this hand-to-mouth program funding assistance week to week. So when that stuff works, that whole idea of helping an organisation build national scale and leave a footprint that the quality and integrity of the program suggests it should be doing, that's what we do.
And that's what you do, or what your mentors?
A mix of all of the above. It's a mix of all of the above.
Yeah, well, that was, for me, that was so much more than I knew we were going to get. And it's so fabulous when a real, authentic human being stands up and shares a story like that. It's inspirational for all of us. And one of the things that I am most glad about is that when people like you, who have the corporate background, who have the confidence, who have the connections, go out there and make a difference, they have so much more horsepower to achieve the sort of outcomes that other people might wish they could achieve, but they don't have the body language, they don't know the language, they're just not capable of doing that sort of thing. So this is a real celebration, and I'm so proud of you. And you know, and may it go from strength to strength. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Well, thank you. And I mean, the profound truth is we learn so much more from the organisations we connect to and we provide to them. And that's not a cliche, it's reality. I've
copies of our annual review to those who are not interested in those. Are they?
What did you get? Why did you get a pack? I'll have one.
So we're going through here.
Sorry? It looks like, yeah. Cool. I just hope for it. Then the two...
Don't worry about it, Captain.
No, it's okay. Hang on, how do you get the slideshow? Where's the iPhone? Down there. Okay. Please. And so the two videos are all in the desktop.
Yeah.
So that's linking to the
Should be fine.
Okay.
Okay, moving right along, our next speaker is Nicole Pietrucha, who is Assistant Secretary, Indigenous Employment Programs Branch of the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. Now, Nicole is going to talk to us about the benefits of recruiting Indigenous employees, and that's being realised by an increasing number of private sector organisations. Many recognise that the real incomes and real jobs that companies can provide is critical to increasing the economic independence of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The Australian government can assist companies, your company, to meet its future workplace requirements in both the short and the long term. Your contribution will provide a way of increasing the economic independence of Indigenous Australians. And Nicole will show us case studies which include Accor and the mining, sorry, how do you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Accor and the mining industry. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Right. I might just get everybody, I know I've got Finch-Lees and AGL in the room, and you already are corporate leaders of conversation. So I'm Nicole Pietrucha from the Indigenous Employment Program Branch from the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations in Canberra. And we've got a Indigenous Employment Program, and so I'll just go quickly around the room.
So I'm David, I'm an artist also.
Brendan and Jessica.
Okay.
I'm very opposed from Breakthrough Management Service.
And I'm all the way from research and employment, providing and accommodation actually solution which are very well cross section.
And I've got Cameron, Deborah, and Merrick. They're all from my department, and they've been there in the store for me, luckily during the day. So probably, I don't know that I need to go through all the presentation. I thought what I might do is just pick out, I've actually got a bit of footage here of some of the mining companies that we've been working with under our program.
Under the government's Indigenous employment policy, the partnership between Corporate Australia and the Commonwealth continues to achieve real employment outcomes for Indigenous Australians. The Corporate Leaders for Indigenous Employment project, now in its 6th year, generates training and job opportunities and at the same time plays a key role in developing Indigenous communities. The Corporate Leaders project is expanding with a remarkable flow-on effect. Many more participants, encouraged by management, are looking beyond training and employment to leadership positions within corporate Australia. Signatories to the Corporate Leaders project represent a diverse range of Australian enterprises, from open cut and underground mining, tourism, hospitality and catering, the transportation and airline industries, agriculture and the livestock industry, manufacturing and motor vehicle assembly, to the commercial service and maintenance businesses. Individual participants also represent a diverse range of occupations, industries and locations around Australia. Corporate Leaders, a partnership between the Australian Government and Corporate Australia that continues to deliver strong employment and training outcomes for Indigenous Australians.
So probably what I just wanted to run through today, Corporate Leaders is just one of the programs that we have under our Indigenous Employment Program. I know that you guys here are probably quite familiar with, we've got a range of programs. But I think a lot of the conversations I've been hearing this morning are about that growing connection between government, community and business and how we can harness people's personal passions. And what I just wanted to sort of highlight is that at the government level there's been a new approach to managing Indigenous affairs. You'll all be familiar with the ATSIC was actually if you like, replaced by what's called the Office of Indigenous Policy Coordination around about the middle of 2004. And the whole of the new approach at the Australian government level, but working in tandem with the state and territory governments, is very much about coordination, partnership and working with Indigenous communities from the grassroots level to work out what we call a shared responsibility approach, where we talk to communities about what employment initiatives, what housing initiatives, what education initiatives they need for their communities to help them gain better outcomes for themselves, but also allow them to assume responsibility for driving their own outcomes and securing their own economic independence. So that at the highest level, if you like, through the Council of Australian Governments, around about the middle of June 2004, there was this explicit commitment between all governments to working together to improve the social and economic wellbeing of Indigenous Australians. I'll just flick through some more slides. Then I suppose the other relevant thing too in terms of talking to you today, and I think I'm probably talking to the converted, but in terms of the Indigenous population, it's actually got a reverse age statistic to the rest of the population. So one of the key reasons why we have a corporate leaders program and we have an Indigenous employment program which recognises the specific employment disadvantages of Indigenous Australians. From a demand perspective though, we believe that there's quite a lot of potential in terms of an untapped labour supply that we are encouraging people to consider and think about as a potential workforce for the future. It's probably not too clear from the graph, but we do know that the young Indigenous population is growing quite significantly, and that there's in particular areas and including in your metropolitan areas, there is a huge untapped potential workforce there that we're encouraging companies and organisations to consider about drawing into their organisations and use. So the current unemployment statistics, I suppose, highlight some of the traditional disadvantages that have been experienced by Indigenous Australians. Their unemployment rate is significantly higher than the overall unemployment rate, so 20%. And given the age profile of the workforce as well, unless there's quite a significant growth in the employment opportunities provided to Indigenous Australians, we're more than likely to see an increase in their unemployment rate. So that's why the government recognises that we do need to do a whole lot more with employment and economic development initiatives with Indigenous Australians. And what we're trying to do is actually increase the engagement with the private sector as well in particular. We know that the employment profile of Indigenous Australians that are in employment at the moment is heavily concentrated in the public sector, and we need to work with companies and organisations such as yourselves to try and increase private sector take-up of Indigenous Australians as potential employees, and look at all the business partnership arrangements that might be possible depending on where your operations might be located. In terms of our corporate leaders program, we do have about 70 companies participating at the moment, and I know AGL and Lendlease are both companies in that program. And what we in that program, what we do with each of the companies is sign a memorandum of understanding, which is like a public level commitment to saying, yes, we do want to work with your companies to increase Indigenous employment opportunities in our operations. Very often too, we make a public statement, which is often about a good marketing opportunity where we get the minister to join up with the company and make a public level commitment to implementing Indigenous employment strategies in your organisation. In terms of working with your companies who've signed up to these memorandum of understanding, we have a package of funding under the Indigenous Employment Program that we can offer to help support Indigenous Australians and companies by providing them with assistance for things like mentoring, things like training, things like pre-work preparation, etc. And that package of assistance is usually fairly flexible, based around the company needs and of course the individual participant needs. They're just a list of some of the companies that we work with at the moment in terms of the corporate leaders. We do have a whole range of other projects and programs, so I'll quickly flip to the sectors that we have members from include mining, agriculture, accommodation, wholesale trade, health and community, and construction's been a pretty big sector in terms of picking up and working with the programs that we offer to increase their Indigenous employment representation. We did a survey just recently of our existing corporate leaders and companies that weren't corporate leaders for Indigenous employment, and some of the reasons for joining put up there for you: good citizenship, enhanced reputation, also to access local job seekers, and that's been a main driver for some of the tourist companies that we work with through the Corporate Leaders Program, and in particular for the mining companies, because given their remote locations, tapping into and harnessing their Indigenous workforces is usually a key to a sustainable and long-term operation for them in those areas. ACOR is one of our corporate leaders who has significantly expanded their support for Indigenous employees through using some of the programs that we have under our Indigenous Employment Program. So each year they've now recently been taking on over 100.
Could you send me on the mic because they recorded?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Remove the mic so I can hear.
Sure. Sorry, yeah. So they've been taking on over 100 Indigenous job seekers in the past 2 years, using support from our programs, but also a significant support from their own organisation. Some of the key factors to the success that ACOR have identified in terms of the program they've put together is that they had strong CEO commitment. They also have a full-time coordinator dedicated to managing their Indigenous employment program, and that program is now mainstreamed so that all managers in the organisation actually have to report on how they're going against Indigenous employment targets in all operations. In ACOR it did start in 8 specific locations across Australia, but now all of the ACOR hotels in all locations are required to provide and build on Indigenous employment opportunities. And probably just one thing I did want to touch on there is the CEO commitment actually coincides, if you like, with the sort of a business driver as well, I think, in the ACOR circumstance, because the reason that the CEO got behind and drove the program significantly is because they had tourist feedback in the around about 2000 from American tourists that they were coming to the Cairns, to the Queensland, up into Broome, places like that, and they weren't seeing what they were expecting, which was Indigenous Australians providing them with their services and their accessible to them in the tourist facilities that the tourists were coming to see Australia. They were feeling they weren't getting an authentic Australian experience. And so I think ACOR's CEO was very committed to the program, and that's something that I know we've talked to a lot of our other corporate leaders as well, and that's a key factor in terms of driving these sorts of programs within organisations and also incorporating it into everyday human resource management. It has to be part of the general way of doing things. It's not sort of, I suppose, much as you've been talking about with the CSR agenda, it's not an additional sort of add-on. It has to be part of the mainstream.
Also Comalco, that's one of the mining companies. Now, for obvious reasons, a lot of the mining companies have been working to increase their Indigenous employment. And I think one of the interesting things with Comalco, they've set themselves a target. Now, that's one of the other drivers in terms of reflecting how organisations are going and how they can drive performance, is actually to have employment targets. They've set themselves a target of 35% local Aboriginal employment by 2010. At the moment, they're around about 20% in their WEPA operations. That's slightly coloured by the fact that some of the Indigenous Australians working in the operations in WEPA at the moment are actually non-local. There's actually quite a transient Indigenous workforce in terms of the mining companies, and that's one of Comalco's main focus is to try and increase the employment opportunities for local Indigenous Australians in their operations. So in terms of how they're trying to support that is actually to build a partnership at community levels in a number of ways, and one of the key initiatives they've worked with in WEPA is actually with the Western Cape College, which is like the high school for WEPA but also for some of the local communities around that location in Cape York. And through their joint initiatives and the measures that they've put in place, they've actually seen quite a significant increase in the retention rates and in the enrolments for the Indigenous Australians in that location, which has been a really great outcome. And one of the sort of incentives Comalco has is that any child who completes Year 12 through the Western Cape College or Year 10, actually, they will offer employment to straight away. So, and that's been part of how they're trying to encourage, engage and boost employment opportunities for Indigenous Australians. That's probably just what we were trying to pick up there was that I think there's a social responsibility agenda that's very much been the topic of the conference for the past couple of days, but there's a very clear business case for many organisations too to be looking at how they can harness Indigenous Australians as part of their workforce, largely because of the Indigenous Australians' younger age profile and because as I think has been talked about throughout for the past couple of days, diversity in the workforce does bring a new perspective and benefits to all in organisations. This is probably what you might want to ask me questions about. These are the sorts of programs that we have under the Indigenous Employment Program. We've got a range of programs that we can utilise to work with companies and with organisations to help support Indigenous employment opportunities. The structured training and employment projects are where we have a package of assistance with a particular company and where they take on board usually a number of Indigenous employees at one time, provide them with training and then move them into the organisation. That's one of the ways that ACOR has been working with us to move Indigenous employees into their organisation. But we do have a range of other assistance, including our National Indigenous Cadetship Program, and that's about we're encouraging employers to hook up with Indigenous students who are doing either tertiary or 2-year diploma courses, and we will support them to complete their studies, and we ask an employer to sort of, if you like, link up with them, and we provide the financial assistance and we ask the employer to provide holiday work experience for that cadet, and then what we're hoping is that that will lead to full-time employment at the end of their studies with that particular employer organisation. So we have a website where we encourage Indigenous students who are looking for a cadetship to register themselves, and then we also encourage employer organisations to register themselves, and then through that mechanism we try and match people up and support Indigenous students to work with organisations across Australia. At the moment we've probably got about 450 cadetships in various companies around Australia, and this year we're looking to take on board about just under 200. The other service that I just wanted to highlight, particularly after Michael's talk, is we have Indigenous Community Volunteers, which is a not-for-profit organisation which has been set up by the government a couple of years ago. And Indigenous Community Volunteers, as the name suggests, is actually an organisation we've set up for people to register where they'd like to do volunteer work with particular Indigenous communities and where they have skills that they feel they would be able to offer as a transfer. And through ICV, we usually have around about 230 to 250 projects happening each year in a range of Indigenous communities across Australia. We've got probably about 700, usually professional people from the private sector largely. About 80% of the people on the books are from the private sector, and what we do is we match up a skill that a community may be looking for with the people that we might have up on our books to try and facilitate a project in a particular community and support skills transfer to those community members so they can benefit from having someone work with them in that community. So that's sort of, I think if you've got employees who are looking for having an opportunity to provide a real community resource, that's something that you might want to look into, and I can certainly provide people with more information about that.
Can you give us an example of a skills transfer?
Well, one of the obvious ones is that a lot of the Indigenous CDP organisations need assistance with developing good managerial skills for running their organisations, so we would get an accountant to go and work with the organisation at a community like a local CDP, work with them for 6 months to set up good record keeping practices, to set up appropriate practices to help them fill in proper fill in tax returns appropriately and things like that. So but we've got accountants, we've had chefs go out to work in communities in the local food stores and or in canteens as well. So, and all range of, through building and construction too, we've had people go out to work with communities where they've been wanting to learn skills so that they can do the upkeep and maintenance of their houses on their community. So there's a whole range of the sorts of professionals we'd be looking for would be unlimited, and the critical thing there is that through ICV we wait for a community to ask us for a particular person for a particular project, and then the project can happen. So it's it has to be something initiated by the community, but then we do try and find a match and help support the project that way. Yep.
How long has the ICV program been going? How long has it been going?
I think it started in 2001.
Yeah. How comprehensive is it from a geographical? Is it around Australia, or as well as the numbers in the bank that you've got?
Okay. It started in about 2001, but under a slightly different name, and then I think it it became Indigenous Community Volunteers in about 2002. It used to have just a single national office in Canberra where people were registering through website and whatever. But it was given 20 million standalone funding from the government in 2004 to set itself up as a longer term entity to support the new whole of government arrangements for Indigenous affairs. So it's now got offices in Perth, in Alice Springs and in Brisbane. So it's got coverage there. They're looking to actually do regional coverage out in New South Wales as well. And so it's got offices in all those locations. The projects that they have too have been spread around throughout Australia. As I said, it's generated by communities. So all up, I think they would have had between 500 to 600 projects completed.
Sorry, just a final one.
Yeah.
What's the ratio of Indigenous people who are registered as volunteers in the program? Any idea?
I don't have a statistic on that. But I do know that about 80% of the people on the register have a private sector background and usually quite a high level of business skill. So, and they're usually in their mid to late career span, if you like. And
They're probably
They could be, yes, I agree with you. But on the other hand, it is a skills transfer, and when we do the scoping of the project and work with the community, it is about saying that this person comes for a short period of time, but with the express objective of transferring the skills to the community. Yep. Sure. Yep. So I did want to just highlight we've got a range of programs. I know we've had.
Are any of them around apprentices? I'm just thinking of.
Through STEP we can. Yep. So have you had some apprentices with us?
I'm trying to get some.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. So through a STEP project we can give support for apprenticeships. Yep. And then also too, if you had a company that was interested in joining our corporate leaders program, we've got a range of supports that we can offer. Sorry.
How long has it been in operation?
Since 1999.
And obviously, since that time, there's been 70 participating organisations.
Yeah, and some have come on and some have gone off as well.
Is there a target that you work towards that we want by this point in time to have X amount? I mean, I'm just wondering how it works internally.
At the moment we're on a big recruitment drive, if you like, so we are looking to encourage membership. What we are particularly trying to encourage is membership from the private sector, because we do want to build employment opportunities in the private sector if at all possible. But so at the moment we don't have a target of 100, 200 or whatever, but we're certainly working towards increasing our membership base at the moment quite significantly. And if anyone has any interest or have people in mind, please come and see me. Yeah. And any other questions?
One short question, probably, as well as time.
Individual
participants. Oh, sorry.
Does anybody?
So just one other program I just want to mention. We've got Indigenous Youth Employment Consultants in around 30 locations, and they're co-located with our job network providers. But they're actually working to target Indigenous youth who have become disengaged, and they're either working with them to either get them back into school, or if they do want to find a job, then because they're co-located with the job network member, then they can work with them to find a job. I just want to alert people to that, and I think there's probably some in the Sydney Metropolitan. Yeah, have you heard about that initiative at all?
I think in the full that Rob said, in a very minor context, but our program works with you, I suppose, youth who are just about to just engage back into students.
Yeah.
Which is the case, so it's different.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Very, very interesting. I'm sure that it was informative to all of you who hadn't heard much about the program before, and I certainly hope it generates some people on board for your program. It sounds excellent. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Just by the way, Nicole,
Well, thank you very much for coming. Enjoy your lunch.
Thanks. Which is where?
Which is where?
You don't know?
Usual place, I guess.
Oh, I just haven't been to the previous days. Somewhere around the corner.
Actually, I went to sleep till last night. I was just so tired. I'm married, I'm sorry. Didn't even think. They were talking about script writing last night. I just wanted to ask you a bit about it when you were talking about, you write the whole year in advance, or you plan the whole year, but how do you actually do it? Do you do it like day by day, or do you do it?
And bearing in mind that you probably want to spiritual life. December 2006. And then on my social platform saying that we worked on the most fabulous holiday to the Abbott's Island, and everything we did were and it was great. Thank you to the and then this is so much work in the field. I must say, we signed on another 5 companies who do not go to the program. The relationship, it's gone really well and it's flowing really well. And they've thoroughly enjoyed the agile, so that's making a big difference. So don't come to you just come and go to it. You can put times and really go to
Yes. Now, this data cable here is our main data send back to. Now for the but from this wall here, that's the one that goes back to the ops. Have you got a list of that too?